Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Today, I invite you into a story that flows from the verses of Homer, whispered across thousands of years. This tale reveals the love, pride, betrayal, and sacrifice of humanity during the short but intense days of the Trojan War, gently unfolding human destinies intertwined with the subtle interventions of the gods. The words we will share illuminate not only the images of battle, but also the inner worlds of those who lived through it. Disclaimer: the visuals in this video were created using artificial intelligence. There are no bloody or excessively graphic scenes. However, some battle scenes have been designed for dramatic effect. If you are sensitive to such imagery, please consider this before watching. If you wish to join me on these journeys, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a comment below telling me which story you'd like to hear next. I look forward to exploring these tales together with you on every adventure. Take another deep breath, relax, and begin listening, wishing you a peaceful sleep. The epic journey begins now. Trojan War. Listen and heed. As the first light of dawn slowly paints the sky, I will convey this epic to you with a voice rising like the narrator's own breath. We begin with the magnificent wedding of Peleus and Thetis. This was no ordinary ceremony. It was a convergence of gods, mortals, and the threads of fate. A moment the universe itself held its breath to witness. Every detail must be felt. The wave upon wave of sea breeze, the scent of seaweed drifting ashore, the harshness of jagged rocks, and the sunlight dancing across the water's surface, each heralding this sacred union and the inevitability of destiny. Zeus, ruler of the heavens and all gods, master of lightning and unyielding sentinel of Olympus, held his throne secure. Yet echoes of the past crept insidiously into the deepest corners of his heart. This power, won by the overthrow of the Titans, was as magnificent as it was fragile. For Zeus, having toppled his father Cronus, knew the cycles of fate favored play. Even in his pride, a spark of fear flared deep within, a spark that cast a shadow over the brilliance of his lightning. If a child should be born to surpass me, who then rules the heavens? He whispered to himself. The thought raged through his mind like a storm echoing among the stars, threatening to overshadow all of Zeus's plans. Then came the goddess Thetis, the shining jewel of the seas, the brightest and most perilous of the Nereids, child of the waves. Her presence in the first light of dawn was like sea foam dancing with the salty breeze, delicate, captivating, yet free enough to shift with even the slightest wind. Her hair shimmered like silver threads in the moonlight. Her eyes gleamed with the green-blue depth of the Aegean. Thetis's beauty was not only skin-deep. Her spirit pulsed with the rhythm of the waves, each breaking on the shore capable of both tenderness and devastation. Whenever Zeus's gaze fell upon her, an unusual admiration stirred in his heart. Even the ruler of the heavens felt briefly like a mortal entranced. Yet the king of gods was not merely an enamored observer. He was a strategist aware of prophecy's weight. Whispers rising from the depths of the seas reached Olympus. Golden columns. Thetis, child, would surpass his father's power and disrupt the order of the gods. The prophecy pierced Zeus's heart like an icy dagger. No matter how alluring Thetis's charm, the fear gnawing at Zeus's soul was stronger. To approach her, to marry her, or bear a child with her, even for a moment, would threaten his empire. With an iron will that even surprised himself, Zeus withdrew. On Olympus's heights, holding lightning in his hands, he chained his own desire. For he was a god who understood the laws of the universe. The greater the power, the more bitter the fall. To approach Thetis is not merely to court a woman, It is to contend with fate itself, he thought. And so, even as admiration mixed with longing stirred within him, his lips remained silently resolute. Her beauty was as enchanting as wind dancing with the sea. Her spirit as perilous as the highest storm. And Zeus, king of the gods, once again bowed to destiny, burying his desires, for he knew that possessing Thetis alone would defy the cosmic order. Looking down from Olympus, Zeus could not escape his thoughts. For Thetis, daughter of the waves, was not only a force of beauty, but one whose power moved gods. Yet the child she would bear could shake his throne. This thought both fascinated and terrified him. The king of gods had to set aside his desires. If Thetis were to wed an immortal, the shadow of prophecy would engulf all Olympus, threatening the divine order. Zeus, to preserve the balance of the universe, made a daring choice. Thetis must be joined to a mortal. A mortal spouse would temper the prophecy's influence and balance the child's destiny between the world of men and the divine. This decision was not easy for Zeus. Even the king, who admired Thetis's beauty and might, lost the chance to claim her by his own desire. His fear was greater still. The order of gods and the stability of the cosmos outweighed personal longing. Thus the most powerful god of Olympus suppressed his own desires, selecting Peleus, a mortal man, as Thetis's destined partner. This choice was not merely a test for a mortal, it was a weaving of the delicate threads of divine plan and destiny. Peleus, the noble grandson of Ajax, was not a king sitting on a throne. His heart was that of a man daring enough to grasp the threads of fate. His courage and heroism were inherited from his ancestors, and the gods had presented him with this trial. Marrying a goddess, especially a Nereid like Thetis, was not merely a stroke of fortune. It was a test of his very soul. Peleus's inner world was a tangle of emotions. Excitement, fear, curiosity, and love all entwined. Echoing within him were the questions, can I succeed? What if I fail in the eyes of the gods? But Thetis did not yield easily to a mortal man. The free spirit of the seas would not accept the chains of a human. Her inner world danced to the rhythm of the waves, shifting like a song echoing through the expanse of sky and stars. When Peleus found Thetis on the rocky shores of the Aegean, her presence was felt not just with the eyes but with all senses. The salty scent of the sea, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, the hardness of the rocks and the light and shimmer radiating from Thetis's skin, every detail reflected her supernatural power, her shifting spirit, and the courage that challenged a mortal. Recalling the advice of wise men, Peleus suddenly seized her. At that moment, the power of nature, the seas, and divine forces erupted. In Thetis's eyes raged a storm, fear, anger, astonishment, and a trace of curiosity intertwined. The first transformation occurred. The smooth-skinned Nereid became a serpent, scales glinting like sunlight on water. Her sharp teeth gleamed, and her venomous hiss reached Peleus's ears. Her cold, coiling body wrapped around his arms, attacking with fury. Yet the courage in Peleus's heart blazed like fire. He deepened his breath, clenched his muscles, and held her tightly, slowly but with unwavering determination. He whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning. I cannot give up." When the serpent form failed, Thetis transformed into a ball of fire. The air filled with sulfur and scorching heat. Her hands burned, her skin seared with pain. Yet Peleus felt not only pain, but also the warmth of love and destiny. The fire of love and fate is stronger than this. I will endure, he thought. Meanwhile, Thetis's mind was a whirlwind of anger and astonishment. The courage of a mortal man threatened her divine freedom, yet inspired genuine admiration. And then came the final transformation. A lion's roar erupted from her shoulders, her claws tearing flesh. Peleus's determination did not waver. Pain, fear, curiosity, and awe filled his heart simultaneously. He grasped not only Thetis's body, but her shifting spirit as well. This was a mythological trial, the union of mortal and goddess, human and fate. The gods of the heavens watched silently, each carrying their own prophecy and expectation. Zeus felt the weight of the prophecy upon his shoulders. Poseidon moved silently over the waves, observing the spirit of the seas. Hera scrutinized Peleus's resolve, closely following a mortal man's challenge to a goddess. Each divine gaze influenced the power and fate unfolding on the scene, intensifying the atmosphere. Even Thetis's final transformation was ineffective. The lion's wild roar echoed across the rocky shores, her claws tearing Peleus's skin, the salty air intensifying the pain. Yet Peleus's determination was so strong, it drew the attention of the gods. A voice rising within him whispered that this pain was but a rite of passage. The suffering was not merely of flesh. It was the price a mortal paid to earn the right to participate in the plans of the gods. Even in lion form, Thetis noticed Peleus's hands did not tremble. This created a crack in her mind. How can this mortal still stand tall against my divine power? She wondered. This thought both angered and fascinated her. Deep within, perhaps the loyalty and courage of this mortal were even more compelling than the freedom of the seas. Thetis's free spirit paused, momentarily struck by this strange admiration. High above in the heavens, Zeus watched the scene. Behind the clouds, his eyes held both concern and a glimmer of appreciation. The shadow of prophecy hung like a heavy curtain over his mind. Perhaps this union will steer fate in an entirely new direction, he murmured to himself. Hera, seated beside him with a faint smile, observed Peleus's resilience with admiration. Poseidon, gliding silently over the waves, appreciated the wrath and determination that Thetis, child of the sea, had shown in defending her freedom. Nature itself joined the stage. The wind carried the scent of salt to Peleus's hair. The rocks echoed with the cries of seabirds. Waves pounded the shore, reflecting the heartbeat of the gods. Every detail reminded that this union was no ordinary love story. It was an event that would touch the very fabric of the universe. Then a calm settled in Thetis's inner world. She felt the futility of her resistance, that Peleus's hands held not only power, but also love and the command of fate. Her transformations ceased. Her wild forms faded one by one. Gradually, she returned to her nereid form. The sea breeze played with her hair. Her eyes no longer glimmered with anger or astonishment, but with curiosity and acceptance. In that moment, two souls were bound together, one mortal, one divine, one a symbol of determination, the other of freedom. At that moment, on the heights of Olympus, the wind struck the golden columns, producing a delicate melody. Zeus leaned back on his throne, eyes fixed on the horizon. Before him, the scene of human resolve clashing with divine power was a small yet vital stone in the balance of the universe. This mortal is no ordinary man, he thought. Perhaps the fire of Prometheus still burns in their veins. Athena, seated beside him, nodded with the wise light in her blue eyes. Courage is a virtue even the gods sometimes lack, she said. Hera, with a faint smile on her lips, whispered, Thetis's anger is fading. Perhaps this union will lighten the weight of the prophecy. Hermes twirled his golden sandals on his toes, letting out a soft laugh. "Or it may make everything even more complicated," he said teasingly. Yet deep down, even the gods' hearts were filled with curiosity and admiration. From the depths of the sea, the songs of the Nereids echoed. Her sisters felt that Thetis's fate had shifted. The waves softened, and moonlight draped the waters like a veil. The universe exhaled briefly. The gods knew that this love would alter not only two souls, but also the course of the ages. Finally, Thetis realized that escape was impossible. Exhausted, and seeing that all her efforts had been in vain, she returned to her magical sea nymph form. No longer did anger or disappointment glimmer in her eyes. Only admiration and wonder at a mortal's resolve remained. Peleus had passed this trial not only through physical courage, but with the profound determination of his soul, earning Thetis's hand. This union became a rare and sacred bridge between mortal and immortal, establishing an unparalleled bond between the order of the gods and the world of humans. The wedding was a magnificent feast where both gods and mortals intertwined. The number of guests was countless. Innumerable gods, goddesses, kings, and heroes had gathered together. Amidst the wine, stories, music, and gifts, the heavens and the earth seemed to hold hands. That day, a divine splendor was stamped upon the mortal world. Gods from every corner of Olympus attended, each reflecting their unique power and majesty. Poseidon arrived in a golden chariot, bringing the power and abundance of the sea, drawn by magnificent seahorses. The waves of the sea moved in harmony with his arrival, and the salty breezes brushed the faces of the guests. Demeter appeared adorned with sheaves of wheat, symbols of the earth and harvest, and a cloak colored like the earth itself. With each step, she reminded all of the rhythm of fertility and life. Melodies rose from Apollo's lyre, spreading joy and peace to every heart, as if re-establishing the harmony between heaven and earth through the notes themselves. Throughout the table, the sweet scent of ambrosia filled the air, and the wines carried the taste of nectar. Each sip offered a sensory experience where the worlds of gods and mortals merged. At this table sat not only the inhabitants of the heights of Olympus, but also the noblest kings, brave heroes, and renowned mortals. Each observed this unique union from their own perspective. Some admired Peleus for the audacity of a mortal challenging a goddess, while others were astonished and curious at Thetis's willingness to surrender herself to a mortal. The atmosphere was so intense that the boundary between sky and earth seemed almost erased. Golden lights merged with the blue of the heavens, mingling with the glint of candles and sunlight, forming a living picture with the awe and joy in the guests' eyes. The power of the gods, the courage of mortals, and human curiosity came together. The resulting energy was more than an ordinary wedding. It was a sacred ritual where history, fate, and legend intertwined. Throughout the wedding, Peleus and Thetis observed one another with admiration and astonishment. Peleus recognized the weight and significance of the moment, understanding that it represented not just a marriage, but a bridge between human and divine. The deep blue of Thetis's eyes reflected both her free spirit and the rare trust she placed in a mortal. Thetis, on the other hand, was left alone with her own complex emotions: anger, curiosity, admiration, and a trace of fear intermingled in her tired yet profound eyes. That day, this magnificent celebration of gods and mortals was not merely a wedding. It symbolized the balance between humanity and divinity, the delicate threads of fate, and the union of love, courage, and respect. For a moment, the universe paused, and all beings watched this union in silent admiration. Yet one name was missing from the guest list: Eris, the goddess of strife, discord, and contention. Wherever she went, peace would vanish, unity would be broken, and conflict would emerge. The gods had chosen not to invite her to preserve harmony, but this was not merely the absence of an invitation, it was a wound to divine honor. Eris, excluded, her heart twisted with anger and resentment, vowed never to forgive this audacity and neglect. Before her eyes, joy and unity flourished, and she would sow the seed herself, the seed of conflict, disagreement, and chaos. In the deepest darkness of the night, Eris slipped into the wedding unnoticed. She moved silently, touching no shadows. The only thing she carried was a golden apple, inscribed with words simple yet capable of trembling hearts. Callisti, to the fairest. She approached close enough to place the apple among the dancers. As it rolled, it gleamed, catching the light. Finally, it came to rest where all could see. Suddenly, silence fell. Music stopped. Laughter ceased. Every gaze fixed upon the shining apple. But three goddesses, each with eyes blazing with desire, were locked onto it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. The golden apple was no mere fruit. It was a provocative challenge, a sacred provocation. By tossing the apple, Eris revealed the deepest weaknesses of the gods: pride, desire, and the nature of conflict. That single word, Callisti, to the fairest, was enough to awaken the immortals' most secret vanity and passions. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, all three goddesses, desired the apple. The question of who was the fairest had to be decided, and eyes turned to Zeus. Zeus did not know whom to choose. Taking sides could blemish his authority. Hera symbolized power and loyalty. Athena represented wisdom and strategy. Aphrodite embodied desire and passion incarnate. Every glance, every breath intensified the glow of the apple, filling the space with invisible tension. Even at the heights of Olympus, silence prevailed. The hearts of the gods waged war between their own egos and passions. In Hera's eyes were anger and claim. In Athena's gaze were strategy, calculation, and patience. Aphrodite's eyes held generous, provocative desire. Each goddess was ready to wield her own path and power to claim the golden apple, and this simple fruit had instantly become the symbol of the most complex rivalry among immortals. Eris, meanwhile, stood in a distant corner, smiling. Her eyes held both vengeance and satisfaction. Her plan had succeeded, and she had sown the seed of the greatest conflict. That golden apple had revealed the most jealous, proud, and passionate sides of the immortals. This simple fruit had become a mirror, exposing even the weaknesses of gods. In the wedding hall, mortals and other gods alike were aware. An observable silence lingered, yet an invisible tension gripped the room, taking every breath. No one dared claim the apple, yet no one could look away. In that moment, a historical instant began, where even immortality was tested, and pride and desire clashed. All this silence and unseen tension formed the first link in the chain that would shape the fate of the future. The jealousy and desire of the three goddesses vying for the golden apple had created an invisible tension at the heights of Olympus. Yet choosing the fairest meant taking sides among the immortals, and Zeus did not wish to involve himself in such a dispute. This sacred quarrel among the gods was laden with both pride and danger. To preserve his own power and neutrality, Zeus decided to leave the choice to a mortal. This decision was more than merely appointing a mortal as judge. It was a way of securing his plan by placing a dangerous responsibility on someone else's shoulders. Thus Paris, no longer merely a shepherd or a distant prince of a royal line, was summoned into the gods' game, entrusted with the task of holding the threads of fate. Was Paris's choice a coincidence, the result of a destiny already written, or a tool for Zeus to escape responsibility? Myths tell it differently, yet one thing was certain. On that day, Paris became a balance point in Olympus's intricate game, a bridge between divine desires and mortal destiny. The rivalry, pride, and longing of the gods would now take form through his decision. In his youth, while tending sheep on Mount Ida, Paris had earned a reputation for fairness. One day he was forced to judge between an animal from his own flock and one brought by the god Ares in disguise, debating which was superior. Though it would have been easy to bow to divine authority, Paris examined the animals carefully, and without knowing Ares' identity, declared the god's animal the better one. This moment showed everyone that he was a judge impartial enough to rule with fairness, even when the property of a god was at stake. Years later, when three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, quarreled over a golden apple inscribed "to the fairest," Zeus hesitated. He did not wish to choose and anger two goddesses. He needed a solution that would spare divine pride. Thus, remembering Paris's reputation for fairness and his earlier just decision, Zeus chose him as judge, shifting the burden of this divine dispute away from himself while preserving the fragile balance among the gods. Paris's birth itself carried the shadow of prophecy. Queen Hecabe's restless dreams, the whispers in Priam's palace, and the fearful words of the seers all spoke the same warning. On the eve of his birth, Hecabe dreamed she held a burning torch or a blazing ball of fire in her arms, the flames spreading across the whole city and its palaces. This was no mere nightmare of an anxious mother. It was a sign for Troy's future. The palace seers interpreted the dream. This child would bring destruction to Troy and its mighty walls. The prophecy pierced the royal family's hearts with ice-cold dread. For King Priam and Queen Hecabe, it was an unspeakable terror. Their newborn son Alexandros, later known as Paris, embodied that fear. Some accounts say Priam, horrified, entrusted the infant to servants, ordering them to abandon him on the lonely slopes of Mount Ida, to be claimed by wild beasts. But fate carved its own path. Some stories tell that a she-bear suckled and protected him. Others say a shepherd found him, and moved by mercy, raised him as his own. Zeus's choice of Paris was not driven solely by fairness, but by strategy. To manage the conflict among the gods, he chose a mortal intermediary. On one hand, a mortal judge's choice would test the pride and desires of the immortals, confronting them with their own natures. On the other, this choice would shape Troy's fate, forging a bridge between divine intervention and the mortal world. Zeus, careful to preserve his own power and authority, maintained this delicate balance. Fate itself became a complex dance between gods and mortals. When Paris was called upon to judge, he was no longer simply a shepherd. He was the very center of the future. Every step he took, every decision he made, carried both the desires of the gods and the destiny of Troy. His judgment, who would claim the golden apple, who would be the fairest, would test the pride, passion, and rivalries of the immortals, while deciding the future of a mortal world. By passing the choice to Paris, Zeus evaded his own responsibility and placed the threads of destiny in human hands. And thus, a single man became the pivotal figure in the gods' most critical game. Paris came into the world neither with joy nor celebration. From his first breath, he bore the mark of rejection and abandonment. The halls of the Trojan palaces did not surround him with warmth and splendor. Instead, he was raised under the sharp winds of Mount Ida, in the shadow of cliffs that whispered the harsh lessons of the wild sky and survival. Every gust of wind instilled resilience into the child's delicate body, and the shadows cast by rocks whispered secrets of attentiveness and survival. Paris's infancy was almost a dance with nature. The rustling of leaves, the murmur of streams, the cries of distant wild animals, all became a language he instinctively learned to understand. This harsh and unforgiving wilderness endowed Paris with a rare openness of heart and an instinctive wisdom. This wisdom did not come from teachers or palace education, but from an intimate connection forged with the unpredictability of life. Away from the golden cages of palace life, the veil of royal intrigue and the burden of prophecies, he learned to listen to the voice of his own spirit. This direct connection with the world explained why he could respond so vividly and impulsively to the promises of the gods. He acted fearlessly and without expectation. When the fateful moment of Paris's judgment arrived, 3 goddesses stood before him, each radiating the power and essence of her domain. Hera, with queenly majesty, grandeur, and noble bearing, embodied sovereignty. Every movement was commanding. Every glance sparkled with authority. Her voice to Paris was both gentle and uncompromising. "Give me the apple, and I will make you ruler of all lands from Europe to Asia. Kingdoms, cities, rivers, forests. Each subject will bow to your will. You will reign with unprecedented power, extending your dominion beyond what the eye can see." Hera's desire for the golden apple was not only about honor or pride, it concerned the order of the cosmos. The wish to be the fairest reinforced her natural place in the hierarchy, affirming her universal authority. Every heartbeat, every thought reflected her consciousness of legacy and authority, her need for unbroken order. The allure of the apple spoke to intellect, ambition, and the desire to rule, a pull where earthly and divine power intertwined. Athena, as the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and war, projected an entirely different force, the symbol of precision, reason, and foresight. She approached with measured grace. Her eyes mirrored calculated intelligence and unwavering logic. "Choose me," she said, her voice both compelling and calm, "and you will gain unparalleled mastery in battle, unmatched skill in strategy, and honor that will resonate forever. Your name will be remembered through generations, defying the erosion of time." Athena's pursuit of the apple reflected her values: intellect, discipline, and achievement above all. For her, beauty was fleeting. Eternal victory, unbroken honor, and the greatness to shape history defined true worth. Every glance toward Paris conveyed responsibility and duty rather than vanity. The fairest must be recognized not by sight alone, but by wisdom. Her offer was structured, logical, and lasting. It appealed to Paris's desire for recognition and praise, but required patience and thought, not an impulsive decision. Aphrodite, however, carried the power of love, passion, and attraction. Her presence enveloped Paris in a current of warmth and longing. Her promise held an intimate, immediate, and deeply human truth. "I will not give you kingdoms, nor temporary fame," she said, her words drifting around him like a gentle touch. "But I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Queen Helen of Sparta will be yours. Her heart, soul, devotion, and the joy brought by passion will all belong to you." Aphrodite's desire for the apple was not for pride. It was to demonstrate the pure force of desire, the quiet yet potent power to shape destinies. Winning the apple would show that beauty and desire could be as decisive as power and strategy. Her eyes gleamed with the weight of intimacy and allure. Paris's heart was pulled in 3 different directions, each irresistible in its own dimension. He understood the magnitude of his choice, yet his instincts, sharpened by years in the wild, drew him toward the immediate allure of human passion. Sovereignty promised control over nations. Athena offered immortal honor and strategic mastery. But Aphrodite's gift promised desire fulfilled directly, tangible and living joy. A soul raised in isolation, hungry for companionship and longing for love, responded most strongly to this. And so, with both boldness and a profound human impulse, he extended his hand to Aphrodite. The apple was now in Paris's palm. Its sacred inscription, "To the fairest," gleamed. Aphrodite was chosen, yet shadows fell upon the faces of Hera and Athena, their lips pressed tight, their immortal eyes silently burning with anger. Their pride had been wounded by the audacity of a mere shepherd. They said nothing, yet seeds of anger and future vengeance silently took root. This invisible but potent tension was a seed that would sprout in both the divine and mortal realms. Now I must speak of Helen, Aphrodite's promise, the tangible embodiment of love and desire, the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. Even her birth was woven with legends. It did not belong to the ordinary world of humans. Her mother, Leda, daughter of King Thetis of Aetolia and wife of King Tyndareus of Sparta, held a place in mythology as both mortal and a woman of legendary beauty. Her elegance commanded respect among gods and mortals alike, carrying the legacy of a noble and powerful lineage. When Zeus, mighty king of the heavens, admired Leda's allure, he took the form of a swan to seduce her. This swan, seemingly innocent, concealed divine power and cunning. Zeus approached Leda in the guise of a swan, appearing safe and harmless, and Leda succumbed to the god's enchantment. From this union, Helen was born. Her birth was shaped not by ordinary human nature, but by divine touch. The interventions of Aphrodite and Zeus had imprinted themselves on Helen's body and soul, making her beauty and charm a supernatural force that left its mark on the world. Helen's birth was no ordinary childbirth. Legends tell that she emerged from an egg. After her union with Zeus in the form of a swan, Leda laid an egg from which Helen, and sometimes her twins, Castor and Pollux, were born. This extraordinary birth symbolized her dual nature, mortal yet divine, signaling that she did not belong to the world of ordinary humans. Helen's beauty was not mere adornment. It became a focal point where Troy and Greece intersected. Love and jealousy, war and passion, politics and fate converged. By promising Helen to Paris, Aphrodite offered not only love, but also a destiny where mortal desires and divine interventions collided. Paris's heart responded to the enchantment of this promise. From that moment on, his choices would shape not only his own desires, but also the intricate fate woven between humanity and the gods. From the moment of her birth, Helen was a symbol of beauty and allure to humans, and a game and balancing force among the gods. Her very existence heralded love, attraction, jealousy, and the inevitable calamities to come. Aphrodite's promise now rested in Paris's hands as both tangible power and responsibility, a key that would alter the flow of history and legend as a vehicle of love and desire. With the apple in his hand and Aphrodite's blessing upon him, a spark of courage ignited in Paris's heart. This spark, kindled by Aphrodite, was more than a divine assurance. It was a force that would carry him along a path fraught with danger and uncertainty toward Helen waiting in Sparta. Every step he took toward Troy, every heartbeat, was guided by the interplay of mortal instinct and divine influence. The weight of human desire was interwoven with the inevitability of fate. On the horizon lay distant Sparta, the promise of Helen and a new life, a beginning of the next chapter in Paris's journey. In the earliest accounts, Paris was not yet the cunning thief eager to take Helen. In some stories, he had traveled to Sparta merely to see Helen, to observe Menelaus's grandeur, and to experience the famed Spartan hospitality. This journey was more than a simple visit. It was a test for the young prince, a way to probe his heart's desires and his curiosity for beauty. By the command of his father, King Priam, he also undertook an official diplomatic mission to establish friendly relations between the two cities and prevent potential conflict. In most tales, Hector accompanied Paris. He was Troy's shield, Priam's noblest son, and the guardian who ensured that the Spartan customs of hospitality were respected. While Hector bore the weight of the city's honor and his father's expectations, Paris was the dreamer, a seeker drawn to beauty and essence. These two brothers reflected contrasting states of mind, stepping into the city as Troy's mind and heart, one guided by discipline, the other by passion, one by duty, the other by the lure of desire. In Paris's eyes, Sparta was not merely a city, but a stage where divine promises and human longing intersected. Hector safeguarded this scene with diplomacy and honor, while Paris, guided by imagination and instinct, was ready to carve his own path. They stepped onto the palace's stone-paved paths. The cool evening air mixed with the smoke of lingering wood and candles. Time seemed to slow, and every moment transformed into the stage of a legend. As Troy's two sons crossed the thresholds of the palace, the formal reception for guests unfolded outwardly. Yet beneath this surface lay ancient laws, heavy responsibilities, and whispers of the gods. Hector's steps were deliberate and measured. As Priam's son, he carried not only Troy's honor, but also his father's expectations and the hopes of their city. Each step was infused with duty. His eyes roamed the hall with looks that bore both warning and concern, as if sensing the first breezes of an impending storm. His spirit reflected the mind of a prince shaped by caution and balance. Silently, he prayed that all would proceed smoothly. Paris, however, was entirely different. He moved as if carried by the wind, light and free, shaped by the harsh gusts of Mount Ida, filled with the liberty of the mountains. Unaccustomed to palace ceremonies, rigid rules and formality, he was a stranger in this environment. His face radiated the daring light of youth, a warm spark left by Aphrodite flickering in his heart. Every step was filled with curiosity, admiration, and a subtle restlessness. His eyes roamed the hall, following the decorations, the paintings on the walls, and the movements of the palace attendants. In Paris's gaze, one could read both excitement and the mysterious longing of the human spirit. He was enchanted by the sweet allure of desire, while sensing the shadow of the gods. Inside, the palace quivered between silence and hierarchy. The stone floors of the guest rooms seemed cold and steadfast, recalling the footsteps of past kings and warriors. Every corner echoed past honors and tragedies, blending with Paris's light footsteps. Hector's stern gaze and upright posture represented Troy's honor and his father's expectations, while Paris's curious and dream-filled demeanor reflected the grandeur of mortal spirit and youthful exuberance. Walking side by side, their contrasting dispositions, one shaped by duty and seriousness, the other by emotions and desires, formed an invisible counterpoint. Of course, the gods were silent witnesses to this moment. Aphrodite observed the spark in Paris's heart, guiding his steps with inspiration and courage. Hera and Athena monitored Hector's presence, filled with caution and order, measuring the delicate balance between mortal and divine. These invisible divine touches could be felt in the stone corridors, the dimly lit rooms, and the gazes of the guests. With every step, the threads of fate were taut, weaving the first notes of a legend that would bind Troy and Sparta. That night, the interplay of Paris's youthful and free spirit with Hector's disciplined and wise demeanor created a dance of harmony and tension in the palace's stone corridors. Both, consciously or not, were actors in the gods' game. One's courage, the other's intellect, provided the first touches to the web of fate. This evening was not merely a visit. It was the beginning of a story that touched the destiny of Troy and Sparta, linking the mortal and divine worlds. In accordance with Xenia, the sacred law of hospitality, King Menelaus of Sparta had resolved to host his guests with the highest honor. The palace's stone-floored halls dazzled with festive tables, wine flowed like amber rivers, lyres trembled with music, songs rose. The magic of the moment worthy even of Homeric heroes. The steaming aroma of rich dishes and roasted meats rose between the stone walls, filling the night with the excitement and tension of a festival. Even the cold stone seemed to sense the uniqueness of this evening. Long-buried memories seemed to awaken again through the mingling joy and tension in the air. Every corner, every column echoed past victories, losses, and forgotten tales. As the evening shadow draped the hall like a delicate veil, Helen appeared. Breath seemed to halt. Helen was not just a face, she was an event, the daughter of Leda, the embodiment of beauty and allure. Every movement, every glance altered the hall's atmosphere, giving the impression that the moonlight had softly settled around her. Innocence and depth merged in her expression, piercing every man's heart like an arrow. The other attendees seemed to fade in her light, their radiance stolen by her presence. Paris's gaze was fixed solely on Helen. It could not turn elsewhere. Aphrodite's whisper seemed like an invisible hand guiding Paris toward Helen. When Helen returned the gaze, her eyes bore traces of a woman's weariness and the weight of a palace. She understood the responsibilities that came with her husband Menelaus's name. Yet something stirred within her, perhaps a first-time awareness, a previously unknown call. Aphrodite, knowing the source of this stirring, had worked like an invisible artist, not through force, but through subtle magic, quietly weaving into Helen's dreams like a melody. This melody had infiltrated Helen's memories and nights, loosening the threads of loyalty one by one. Aphrodite's touch was not mere desire. It was a divine intervention to untangle the complex threads of fate. Paris's soul quivered in unison. The moment he saw Helen, his youth sharpened by the freedom of the mountains and the harsh lessons of the wild, he succumbed to the spell of desire. His young and passionate heart felt deeply the magnitude of this feeling promised by Aphrodite. In an instant, he was both enchanted and filled with sincere longing. Every step he took on the hall's stone floors carried these invisible powers. The subtle touches of the gods supported both his courage and his desires. As Helen's gaze met Paris's, the storm within her began to show. Responsibilities and loyalties, previously binding her like chains, lightly loosened under Aphrodite's melody and Paris's gaze. Each look vibrated the strings of both her fidelity and the as-yet unnamed longing. Aphrodite's magic, with invisible hands, directed these threads, creating an inevitable attraction between Paris and Helen. At that moment, time seemed frozen between the palace's stone walls. The trembling strings of the lyres set the rhythm of this silent encounter observed by knights. The aroma of the food, the tension in the air, and the mingling of unexpected desires created a mystical atmosphere. Paris, mesmerized by Helen's beauty and presence, boldly stepped forward with the courage given by Aphrodite. Helen, for the first time, allowed her heart to recognize her own desires. This first glance was the initial touch of invisible threads weaving together Troy and Sparta, love and fate, the paths of gods and mortals. As the night progressed, the hall's atmosphere only intensified. Every guest's breath, every laugh, and every glance took on a different rhythm under the influence of this invisible enchantment. The silent communication between Paris and Helen echoed across the palace's heavy stones, foreshadowing future wars, loves, and betrayals. Aphrodite's magical touch combined Paris's youthful daring with the awakening passion in Helen's heart, transforming this evening from a mere visit into a pivotal moment where epics would begin to be written. Paris's plan was both subtle and deeply human. Preparations for the ship were made quietly, and midnight whispers mingled with the night sky. In some accounts, Helen set out of her own will. In others, there was a gentle coercion. Time has blurred this delicate detail. Burning with desire, Paris took Helen from Sparta and sailed toward Troy. This was not merely the union of two people. It was the theft of a city's honor, the shaking of a society's order. Sparta's proud king Menelaus, upon realizing such a betrayal, became more than a husband. He was the embodiment of his kingdom's and family's honor. The insult struck him like a slap, and he was determined to restore his dignity at any cost. It was at this point that Agamemnon entered the scene. The powerful and ambitious ruler of Mycenae regarded his brother's honor as his own. Paris' action was not only a family matter for Agamemnon, but also an opportunity regarding Troy, long in his sights. Helen's abduction provided him with the perfect pretext and timing to strike at Troy. Strategic goals and personal vengeance intertwined. This event opened a door for Agamemnon to strengthen Mycenae's dominance and enhance his power in the Greek world. Initially, Menelaus maintained his hospitality with feasts, praises, and ceremonies, yet the pain of losing his wife gnawed silently within him. The stone walls of the palace, heavy with shadows of the past, seemed to pierce Menelaus's heart with shame and betrayal. Memories surfaced of the oath Tyndareos had exacted years before from Helen's many suitors. If harm came to Helen's husband, all suitors would unite to defend him. Almost every notable prince had sought Helen's hand. A promise made to preserve peace had now sown the seeds of war. Agamemnon's calculations accelerated after Paris's deed. This incident offered the flawless opportunity to implement his plan to conquer Troy, to reclaim his brother's honor, to respond to Helen's abduction, and to advance his long-standing strategic goal against Troy. All these aims converged, and Agamemnon decided to act. With Paris and Helen setting sail, not only the fate of two individuals, but the balance of the entire Greek and Trojan worlds began to shift. As I mentioned, Agamemnon wielded great power. When Helen came of marriageable age, Sparta's king Tyndareos faced the immense challenge of choosing a suitable husband for his daughter. Helen was renowned for her beauty, and princes and kings from all over Greece flocked to Sparta to seek her hand. Selecting one from this crowd without offending the others created a profound diplomatic dilemma. Each suitor tried to stand out with their devotion and gifts to Helen. This complex situation also weighed upon young Helen's decision-making. Each suitor offered distinct power, wealth, courage, and nobility, testing her heart and eyes. It was at this moment that Odysseus, king of Ithaca, intervened. Considering his chances slim against Helen's beauty, he did not offer gifts nor push himself forward. Yet, seeing Tyndareos' dilemma, he proposed a solution. All suitors should swear a sacred oath to defend the husband Helen would choose. Thus, the choice would rest solely on Helen's free will, and in case of conflict, all suitors would unite to protect the chosen one. Tyndareos accepted the proposal and had all suitors swear upon a sacrificed horse in a formal ceremony. This oath resonated not only in Sparta, but throughout all Greek cities, creating a sense of unity among Helen's suitors. After long observation and internal deliberation, Helen chose Menelaus. He was both courageous and wise, having earned Tyndareos' trust and proven capable of ruling Sparta. Moreover, Menelaus embodied maturity, justice, and loyalty, qualities that spoke to Helen's heart beyond mere beauty. He was a partner who could see her soul and character. This choice reflected not only Helen's personal desires, but also the conscious acceptance of responsibilities she would bear as a queen. Her marriage to Menelaus was a union of love and reason, desire and duty. Years later, Prince Paris of Troy arrived in Sparta, guided by Aphrodite's promise and his own desires. His mission was to foster friendly relations and prevent any potential conflict between Troy and Sparta. Hector accompanied him, serving as Troy's shield and ensuring that the sacred laws of hospitality were upheld. Yet Paris's eyes were fixed upon Helen, shining in King Menelaus's palace. Guided by Aphrodite's whispers and the fire of his youth, Paris felt a deep longing for Helen. His gaze, shared meanings in silent glances and shadows, threatened the order protected by sworn oaths. At first, Menelaus behaved as a generous host, arranging feasts and honoring Paris and Hector. Yet inwardly, the union of oath-bound suitors and the violation of Helen's choice struck him as a threat to his honor and kingship. The oath ceremony conducted by Tyndareos had been intended to preserve peace and order, but now, with Paris abducting Helen, that very oath became a mechanism that would unite the Greek city-states and spark a great war. This chain of events revealed how individual desires, divine interventions, and human will could create profound and unpredictable effects on societies and history. Paris's extended hand, pulling Helen away, might have seemed at first like a small human act, a flight the result of passion, perhaps even a moment of sudden folly. Yet beyond this appearance lay a much greater seed. The small golden apple tossed at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, Eris's gift of discord, had already ignited the first spark of the chain of fate. The interventions of the gods, human choices, and unforgettable events converged in the shadow of this seemingly minor act. The immortality of Thetis, Zeus's prophecy of the future, Peleus's resistance, and Eris's exclusion from the wedding formed an invisible canvas upon which Paris's decision was painted. Aphrodite's promise, combined with desires born from Paris's long-neglected childhood, forged a single determination: to take Helen and return to Troy. In Paris's heart, human and divine motivations intertwined. His childhood solitude and his inner connection with nature had made him bold, fearless, and at times even reckless in human relationships and desires. The words whispered by Aphrodite acted as a warm guide touching his heart, showing the path where conscious choice and instinct merged. This decision became not merely a matter of the heart, but a spark that would alter the fates of thousands. Paris acted not only as a young man captivated by Helen's beauty, but also as a figure confronting the intricate web of divine intervention, human desire, and destiny. Aphrodite's promised apple offered both a trap and an opportunity in the games of gods and men. Paris's act would ignite an unforeseen war in the Greek world, unleashing stories of heroism, betrayal, love, and revenge in rapid succession. Every step Paris took shaped by both his own passion and the guidance of divine plans, was a moment of freedom and responsibility. Helen's warm and vibrant presence in his eyes was not merely a goal but a mirror completing the missing pieces of his life. This act combined the complexity of human nature, the intervention of gods, and the inevitability of fate. What seemed like a simple flight was in reality the beginning of a destructive and transformative event for both Troy and the Greek world. As the walls of Troy embraced them upon their return, the distant Achaean armies had already begun their preparations for war. Paris and Helen's return to Troy signified not just the union of two individuals, but the shaking of an entire society's order. In the distance, the Achaean city-states had begun their preparations for war. The clash of iron, the hammering of shipwrights, the cries of thousands echoed across the waters of the Aegean. Menhirs were erected, banners unfurled, crews boarded ships, and armor was polished. The call of Menelaus, the oath of Tyndareos, the vengeance of Hera and Athena, the jealousies of the gods, all converged, leaving no path of return. In Sparta, the emptying of a single house became the first link in a long chain. Countless ships would sail, children would await their fathers, and the fears growing in the hearts of mothers would sprout. In the eyes of those left behind there was a shadow. In the chests of those departing, a burning passion. And among the gods, the desire for a greater game was stirring. Paris's bold act, Hector's silent anxiety, Menelaus's wrath, and the shadow of Tyndareos' oath, all these elements intertwined, war had become inevitable. Amidst all this turmoil, Hector's role stood out. Torn between loyalty to his family and Troy's honor, and compassion for Paris's desires, he was trapped. Though he outwardly maintained a calm demeanor, his inner anxiety grew. He could not abandon his brother. Paris's act was not merely a matter of personal love, but a complex narrative shaped by family, city, and divine intervention. Menelaus, both husband and king in Sparta, could not contain his fury. Tyndareos' oath, once seen as an instrument of peace, had now transformed into a call to war. Fueled by his pride and anger, he resolved to unite the Greek city-states, embarking on a quest for vengeance and honor. This movement was not just the response to a personal betrayal, but the first domino in a chain that would alter the fates of gods and men. If one word could describe Tyndareos' oath, it would be chain, a sacred bond, an invisible link connecting peoples, kings, and families. The oath had been established to preserve peace and curb rivalry, yet Helen's absence tested the weight of this chain, and the links among the peoples tightened. Menelaus' initial reaction was not merely the silent wrath of a betrayed spouse. He stood as a symbol carrying the honor of a kingdom and a lineage. In the ancient world, honor was preserved not only through blood but also through words. Thus Menelaus set out to find men who would uphold the sacred oath. In every glance, in every breath, there was the combination of anger and pride, mingled with the absence of the lost wife. When Agamemnon saw the fire in his brother's eyes, he turned the alarm into opportunity. He moved not only to reclaim lost honor, but to seize the wealth and prestige of strategically rich Troy. For Agamemnon, the call was no longer personal. It had become the opening curtain of a long-prepared game on the stage of an empire. Words spoken in the stone corridors of Mycenae were the first lines of a script preordained by gods and human plans, forgotten for millennia. The call spread with the wind. News traveled from ports to village roads, from palace corridors to stone streets. Each city awoke to its own rhythm, each preparing for its own reasons. Warriors driven by anger and vengeance, those ready to share burdens, young men chasing adventure, and elders challenging the judgment of fate. All answered this call. Yet more important than the numbers and leaders listed in Homer's catalogues were the human faces behind them. A mother, touching her son's shoulder for the last time, could not hold back her tears, placing a protective shield upon him. A farmer took a final glance at his field, leaving home with sorrow, bidding farewell to a lifetime of labor. A poet, before departing for battle, whispered a farewell line to console his heart. Each person carried the melodies of their own world, preparing in silent rhythm. The oath was more than mere words. It was a responsibility, a burden, a helplessness, and a source of courage etched into every heart. When Menelaus's fury, Troy's pride, and the invisible bonds of the oath merged with Agamemnon's strategic mind, the fuse of a process that would change not just a city, but a civilization, was ignited. As Agamemnon contemplated the economic and political advantages of war, a glint of ambition sparked in his eyes. Every city, every house, every individual responded to this call with their own story. Some with pride, some with fear, some with hope, and some with the inevitability of fate. During these preparations, every ship, every shield, every piece of armor gained meaning. They were no longer mere instruments of war, but sacred symbols carrying the hopes and fears of those leaving home. A mother's silent prayer for a departing child, a young warrior's excitement, an elder leader's experience and concern, all converged to form a mosaic of humanity. And at the very center of this mosaic stood Tyndareos's oath, visible yet unbreakable, binding humans, kings, and gods alike, each link hiding a story, each connection a life. In the end, this sacred network of the chain and the human faces formed the foundation of Agamemnon's campaign plans. Every step, every order, every preparation was tied to this oath. Without it, there could be no justification for such a vast expedition. The tears, heartbeats, and silent prayers of the people, interwoven with the oath, were spinning the invisible threads that would shape a war told in legends for millennia to come. Aulis, on the eastern coast of Boeotia, directly across from the island of Euboea, shone as the sacred gathering harbor of the Achaean fleet before the Trojan expedition. Its rocky shores and deep waters silently bore the hulls of hundreds of ships. Thousands of soldiers and sailors gathered along the coast, their sails waiting for the wind. The preparations of the fleet were almost ritualistic. Prayers rose around the fires, priests murmured their hymns, armor was polished, and shipwrights swung their hammers in rhythmic cadence. Every detail was meticulously attended to, as if to display both human effort and divine approval for the expedition. As preparations continued, the gods did not remain silent. Rumors spread that Agamemnon had either hunted Artemis's sacred deer or spoken arrogantly against the goddess. From that moment, the winds ceased, the sea grew still, the ships lay motionless in the harbor, their sails idle. The sea was as quiet as a mirror. Thousands of hopes and fears were trapped behind an invisible barrier. Amid this ominous silence, the seer Calchas, inspired by Apollo, revealed the cause of the goddess's wrath. To appease Artemis, a bloody sacrifice was required. Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. Calchas's revelation shook the camp. For Agamemnon, the weight of two grim choices became suddenly apparent. Should he preserve the honor of the Greek city-states and Menelaus' reputation, or follow the instinct of a father to protect his child? This dilemma tore at the king's dual roles as both leader and parent. In the council, the gravity of the decision was visible on every face. The silence spoke more than words could. Iphigenia was summoned to Aulis at her mother Clytemnestra's request. She was told she would be married to Achilles, Dressed in white, arriving like an innocent bride, she was in truth being brought before an altar. The mother's sorrow, the father's helplessness, the army's anticipation, all converged within the sanctity of the harbor. The conflict within Agamemnon mirrored the spirit of the entire camp. Every glance carried both personal pain and a sense of national duty. Meanwhile, the council at Aulis debated the necessities of the expedition and its moral cost. Nestor spoke with wisdom, great Ajax with determination, Diomedes with courage and intelligence, and Odysseus with strategy and cunning. Each leader represented the hopes and fears of their people, weighing the broad consequences of the decisions they would make. These debates demonstrated that the harbor was not only a military staging ground, but also a social and religious crucible. Ritual and preparations continued through the night. Soldiers prayed by flickering fires. Armor was polished. Arrows and spears were arranged. Shipmasts were raised, sails readied. Some gazed toward the horizon, imagining the fate beyond the sea, while others cast a last look toward their families. Pride and grief intertwined. Every movement was part of a ritual in which human will was tested against divine will. At the climax of the night, Calchas emerged again to declare that the only way to appease Artemis' wrath was the sacrifice of Iphigenia. Agamemnon knew well what agreeing to this meant for him as both king and father. The camp fell into silence. Iphigenia's fate was entwined with that of the army. Some saw it as the salvation of the nation, others as a symbol of shame and sacrifice. From this point, legends diverged. One version tells that at the moment of the sacrifice, the winds returned and the fleet continued its journey. Other accounts claim that Artemis rescued Iphigenia, sending a deer in her place, and took the girl to Tauris or distant lands. Whichever version one embraces, that night laid the spiritual foundation of Aulis, the collision of human will, divine intervention, and societal responsibility. In the final scene, as the harbor stirred once more, Aulis became more than a gathering point. It transformed into a stage where human history, betrayal, love, and divine games intertwined. Every torch, every prayer, every hammer strike whispered the possibilities of both victory and tragedy for the fleet bound for Troy. As the ships awaited the wind, soldiers held their breath, preparing to walk the fine line of fate under the shadow of the gods. Thus, Aulis was remembered both as a harbor and as a sacred arena, testing the delicate balance between humanity and divinity. The name of Iphigenia, uttered in prayers that night, became both the spiritual foundation and the tragic symbol of the Trojan expedition. The emergence of Achilles, the rise of the brightest star. These names were not merely warriors. Each was a living story, carrying their own hunger, fear, and destiny. Yet in this symphony, one voice had not yet sounded: Achilles. Son of the sea nymph Thetis and the mortal king Peleus, half god, half human, Thetis knew two paths lay before her son, a short but legendary life or a long forgotten one. The mother prayed, not for immortality, but for a quiet and peaceful existence. Yet the heart of Achilles burned with the call of war, wrapped though it was in sand and cloth. On the island of Skyros in the palace of Lycomedes, he hid in the guise of a girl. There was a spark in his eyes, the light of a warrior concealed within the garments. Odysseus, with his cunning, noticed this flicker. He brought treasures of gems and silks to the palace. Among them he placed a gleaming shield and sword. Achilles could not resist. He seized the sword. The moment the blade reached his hand, the voice of fate was heard. The warrior had emerged. In that instant, the brightest, most tragic star on the road to Troy appeared. Achilles' arrival was dramatic. The army's power surged, yet humanity and tragedy still resided within his heart. His shadow, his mother's love, his father's legacy, and his rebellious, youthful spirit walked with him at every step. On the shores of Aulis, women wept silently. A mother's tears fell and mingled with the wind as they touched the earth. Children waited with slender hope. Morning prayers, like gentle rain, were etched into the soil by the hands of farmers. When the ships finally set sail, sails filled, oars harmonized with the waves. With each step, the numbers dwindled. The sea gathered the soldiers beneath a vast canopy. This movement was more than a scene. It was the birth of a myth. Thousands of ships, millions of breaths, advancing with a single purpose. Every hero stepping onto the stage was on an inner journey. The lines on Nestor's face bore the wisdom of years and the weight of war. Every glance soothed the fears and hopes of young warriors, guiding them forward. Diomedes' eyes reflected youthful courage and the harshness of battle. Each victory matured his spirit, shaping him into a deeper warrior. Idomeneus, as a leader shaped by seas and storms, measured his resilience against the power of nature. Each wave mirrored his leadership. Among this crowd, Achilles shone as the brightest star. But his tragedy was also the deepest. The call within his heart merged with the mercilessness of war and the price of heroism. With each stroke of the oar, he confronted his mother's fear, his father's legacy, and his own youthful courage. War was not merely sword and shield. It was an inner trial, a journey of the soul. On the shore, women knelt, whispering prayers. Some shed tears in silence. Others embraced their sons one last time before letting go. Young warriors felt fear and excitement together for the first time. Their hearts beat to the enchantment of battle. Some went for honor, some for vengeance, some for divine favor. Yet in all of them lay small, but hard truths. The future of a family, the adventurous desire of youth, the ambition of a king. The sea reflected these thousands of stories, the fear, hope, and expectation, like a vast mirror. Every wave echoed inner worlds. Every wind whispered the silent voices of heroes. The small sound of an oar became the rhythm of a great destiny. A ship's sail reminded all of the fine line between life and death. Every step of Achilles was a melody. Strength, fear, anger, and compassion intertwined. Alongside him, the other heroes, Odysseus' cleverness, Diomedes' courage, Nestor's wise silence, and Idomeneus' command of the sea, united in a single rhythm. This rhythm marked not only the beginning of a war, but the dawn of a human epic. The misty morning of Aulis spread over the sea like a thin cotton veil. The ships cut through the water like shadows, while the oars moved gently, tuck, 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 keeping a steady lullaby rhythm. The rhythmic breathing of the rowers mixed with the faint murmur of the waves, making the planks tremble. The fabric of the sails rustled lightly against the wind. Beneath each plank lay a farewell, a prayer, a hope. The coolness of the wet deckboards brushed the bare soles of the soldiers' feet. With every step, the windows of distant homelands, the faces of mothers, fell into memory. This slowly growing rhythm was like a soft undertone accompanying the birth of a legend, a lullaby to the ears, planting resistance in the hearts. The horizon filled with the thin but resolute silhouette of the walls of Troy. As the pale sunlight streamed over the walls, blending the salt of the sea with the scorched smell of the land, the air within the entire camp thickened for a moment. The ship's hulls touched the sands. The oars stopped. The wood fell silent with tiny tremors. As the soldiers first set foot on land, the fine friction of the pebbles, The faint clinking of armor and the stringing of bows mingled together. Those landing moved carefully, almost ritualistically, feet as rhythm, hands gripping spears, breaths held in collective anticipation. The first arrows silently flew from the bows, making a brief visit through the sky before falling to the shore like shadows. Then stones rained from the walls, as if the sky had briefly darkened, filled with arrows like a flock of black birds. When the first cries spread across the sand like waves, this action had become the beginning of an irreversible path. Small stains of blood on the sand entered the dust clouds spreading across the plains. Every step left a mark. Every clash revealed a story. The duel between Paris and Menelaus created a scene before the walls where time seemed to freeze for a moment. Two bodies, two honors. The sound of a bow stretched like a feather, the tremor of anticipation under the gleam of a sword. Menelaus's strength was visible, while Paris's stance carried both confidence and delicacy. But fate lay beyond ordinary hands. At that moment, the gentle yet determined hand of Aphrodite intervened, saving Paris from human destruction and carrying him from the point where violence had briefly paralyzed him back to Helen's chamber. Menelaus's actual victory was not achieved. The duel ended inconclusively. This intervention provided a vivid example of how the gods' games could twist human fate. Everyone learned that day. Here the gods would often take the stage, subtly or sharply altering human plans. A delicate equation existed between human intentions and divine desires. This equation would become the cause of greater suffering later. As the Achaean camp settled on the shore, logistics were set into motion with a quiet yet sharp rhythm. Tents were pitched, supplies counted, medical materials placed in designated spots. The survival of a large army depended as much on the operation of soup cauldrons, bread kitchens, and water jars as on swords. In one tent, medics cleaned wounds. Elsewhere, a few men anxiously checked the watch lists. This quiet order was a domain separate from the clamor of war, a space preserving human life. The Trojans, behind their walls, regrouped under Hector's calm yet sharp command. As Hector's name echoed along the walls, confidence spread among the people. His steps were firm and heavy, carrying the city's ancient memories. He was both warrior and father figure to the city. Thinking of his wife Andromache and their young son, he balanced a meaningful scale in his heart. When night fell, matters shifted. Tasks in the shadows became more precious. Odysseus's plans, laid under dim light, combined with the silent steps of Diomedes' horse. One night, Diomedes and Odysseus captured a Trojan scout named Dolon. The atmosphere was cold, silent, and cautious. Dolon no longer bore the faint jokes of the sentries. Ears and eyes strained for information. Conversations were whispered and exchanged. While interrogating him, Odysseus and Diomedes used the gathered intelligence to infiltrate allied camps farther from Troy. They silently neutralized sleeping guards, seized important horses, and returned to their camp with the first light of dawn. This night, raid offered a different kind of glory than open-field heroics, a herald of how small victories gained in the shadows could make a great difference in a long siege. By day, Diomedes' cavalry charges tore through the lines, while Ajax's massive shield stood like an unyielding wall at the front. Odysseus's cunning games connected the fragments of night. Each hero's movement shaped the war as if different instruments formed a shared melody. This cycle, blending the heat of the ground by day and the cold of the wind by night, tested human physical and mental limits. On one side, the crude power of spears. On the other, the silent moves of strategy. These two forces advanced in parallel. The first days of the siege were woven with small victories and minor losses. Each morning someone would be gone, each evening another would fall into quiet prayer. Inside the city, Trojan mothers sliced their bread thinner, water jars were filled less often, hunger gnawed not only at stomachs but at hearts. Diseases spread quietly, both behind the walls and in the camp tents. As much as weakened bodies, spirits succumbing to despair began to break. This slow exhaustion was a far more insidious enemy than the bursts of battle. The gods were not silent witnesses to human suffering. Apollo drew his bow alongside the Trojans, Athene illuminated the Achaean strategies, and Artemis's shadow echoed Iphigenia's sacrifice among the tents. These interventions sometimes instilled courage in hearts, sometimes gnawed at consciences. Every prayer, every offering could amplify small human choices, bending fate overnight. Humans oscillated between hope and guilt as they looked to their gods. When thinking of their children, they inclined to entreat the divine. The harshest aspect of war was often not a great explosion, but the routines that slowly eroded the soul. Night watches, weary bodies, prolonged hunger, and ceaseless anxiety weakened even the strongest soldiers' knees. Yet still, retreat or surrender was a faint path for most. Honor and pride often outweighed practical reason. Each tent pitched, each fire lit, was not only logistics, but also a statement of will and culture. In one clash, arrows shot by archers glided through the sky like a dark cloud. At that moment, the sunlight gleamed on armor while the shadows of black arrows collided. The dark silhouettes of the arrows cast shadows on the sand. This black cloud imagery created the visual rhythm of war, gleaming bronze, bright sun, and the deadly lines passing over them. For the people, time flowed both slowest and fastest in that moment. Every strike altered lives, every blow wrote a fate. Amid this harsh reality, small moments of mercy shone. Two soldiers crouched by a war chariot momentarily forgot they were enemies, humming an old song. Elsewhere, a hand from the enemy offered water to a wounded soldier, a small light shining amid blood and fury. These moments revealed fragile yet resilient pieces of humanity within the harsh landscape. Small gestures could sometimes leave more impact than a hopeful sunrise. When Achilles' name began to echo through the camp, the Myrmidons' stagnant order shook. The young leader's arrival spread like the silence before a storm. His body language, the anger in his chest, the cold flame in his eyes stirred mixed feelings among the Myrmidons. Hope, loyalty, but also anxiety. For however powerful Achilles was, he could not escape the shadow of prophecy. It was said every great victory carried a cost. This awareness planted a seed of unease even amid triumph. As time turned days into weeks, weeks into months, the siege deepened. The joy of small victories did not last long, and the cold reality of the next day struck harsher. One night, a trap planned by Odysseus shook the morale of the Trojans. Another midday, Diomedes' charge had created a heap of enemies by mere meters. Thus, small blows accumulated, creating a massive erosive effect. Each night raid, each reconnaissance, slowly shaped the fate of the siege. Hector's figure was always visible above the walls. He was the Trojans' hope, the voice of discipline, their guardian. Seeing the concern on Andromache's face, he would glance briefly at the quiet walls, then return to strengthen his soldiers. These family moments were fragments of humanity hidden within the city. Every stone held a name, every brick a story. These were the things Hector had sworn to protect. Months passed, and the siege became a kind of heavy rhythm, time halting with clashes, flowing with waiting. monotony shattered by victories and losses. Sometimes a morning brought new hope, sometimes an evening more depletion. People slowly discovered a deeper fatigue within themselves, yet the languages, songs and prayers of the legend continued. Each night the crackle of fires, the gleam of armor, and the gentle lapping of the sea against the shore repeated like a lullaby. Tuck, 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 tuck. This repetition opened the door to sleep. Soldiers immersed in dreams saw windows of home, mothers' voices, and lights of their houses. Then upon waking they planned again. One day a great clash erupted in the middle of the plains. The clash of shields, the breaking of spears, the sound of horses' hooves, and human cries rose like a symphony. Arrows shot by archers moved across the sky like a dark cloud. Their shadows fell to the ground, enveloping the battlefield like night. That dark arrow cloud intensified the visual rhythm of war. The weight of the moment was felt in the mix of sounds and colors: bright bronze, red blood, black arrow shadows, dust and smoke. And so, after the first weeks, the grip tightened, the siege dragged on, and attrition began. Some nights were so heavy that the sentries shrugged at each other. Some mornings, the silence of a single tent dampened the morale of the entire camp. Diseases increased, wounds multiplied, yet the soldiers did not retreat. For this war was no longer a matter of a city or a king, but a test of each soldier's own honor, pride, and will to survive. In the following days, small acts of heroism and sacrifice became the foundation stones of the legend. A pot of soup shared unnoticed, a musician singing an old song by the fire, bringing smiles to faces, a mother whispering a story recalling the warmth of home. Such moments were human crumbs softening the harsh face of war. And they were recorded, because legends recount not only great falls, but also small acts of goodness. The early periods of the journey from Aulis to the shores of Troy struck the first notes of a 10-year epic. The Paris-Menelaus duel rendered inconclusive by divine intervention. The capture of Dolon and the effects of night raids, Hector's resolve on the walls, Odysseus' cunning, Diomedes' cavalry charges, Ajax's formidable strength, and Achilles' shadow spreading over the camp with his myrmidons, all told in epic texture, yet also with a lullaby seeping into the human heart. As night fell and the camp's sounds softened, the faint murmur of the sea and the memory of oars transformed into a lullaby for the ears. The groans of the wounded, the calm crackle of fires, the whisper of leaves in the wind. These were notes opening the door to sleep. When morning came, the world would breathe differently than the day before, perhaps a little more weary, perhaps a little more determined. Yet humanity would remain, with hope, fear, and pride. And the epic would continue, woven as a long lament between the shadows of gods, the small mercies of humans, and their great battles. Agamemnon, as the commander of the Greeks, was thinking of reaping the fruits of victory. Yet in the shadows of the camp, the shadow of Achilles began to stretch. Whispers spread that the heroes feared his power, that the Myrmidons' formidable presence intimidated even the bravest. When a plague swept through the camp, the priest and seer Calchas delivered a prophecy to confront the anger of the gods. Chryseis, among the girls captured by Agamemnon, must be released to appease Apollo's wrath. Agamemnon obeyed, though deep inside he felt a profound shame and humiliation, for he believed he deserved the greatest share of the spoils of war. In his eyes, releasing Chryseis was a loss no leader could endure, a strike against his honor. Honor wounds honor, and Agamemnon sought to repair this shock immediately. He forcibly seized Briseis, the war prize of Achilles. In Achilles' eyes, Briseis was not merely a reward, but a symbol of the respect earned through victories. This single act by Agamemnon reverberated through the Achaean camp like thunder. As the fire of pride flared, the warriors felt a crack within their hearts. Who was Briseis? She was the young woman captured by Achilles during the fall of Lyrnessus, whose beauty was famed in song. When Lyrnessus fell, she lost her husband and her siblings. Achilles showed no mercy to her family or people during the city's plunder. Briseis' father, Briseis, was known as a sacred man, perhaps a priest, but the destruction of his house shook the title he carried. Achilles had chosen Briseis as a spoil, viewing her as a reward of war. Briseis accepted this role, yet her story was a tragedy tested more by humanity than by the spoils. When Briseis arrived at Achilles' tent, his devotion to her, how much she embodied his strength, became apparent the moment she was handed to Agamemnon. She was not merely a physical prize, but a motivation for heroism, a part of his pride. Thus, Agamemnon's act struck the hero's spirit to its core. The fire in Achilles' eyes flared. He was ready to draw his sword in anger, but Athena's unseen hand prevented the moment from escalating. Instead of a storming outburst, there came a silent withdrawal. Achilles withdrew from the war, the Myrmidons returned to their tents, and a deep, empty silence settled over the heart of the camp. This silence was a protest more powerful than any clamor of weapons. At that moment, the balance before the walls of Troy shifted. Hector's spear moved more boldly forward. The Trojans breathed more freely. The Achaeans began to bow under the weight of their own pride. Agamemnon's taking of Briseis did not only heighten tension with Achilles, it shook the spirit of the army, causing leaders to reconsider their loyalties and the identity of the warrior. And Briseis became a silent but sharp figure in this story, a woman in the shadow of war, a symbol within the confines of humanity and shame after losing everything. Beyond being a spoil, she sparked conflict and war. She ignited Achilles' rage, shattered Agamemnon's pride, and revealed deep fissures within the camp. Every night along the windswept shores of the Scamandros, whispers rose like smoke around the Achaean campfires. Flickering flames cast shadows on anxious, drawn faces. Odysseus, fox-like eyes glinting, turned to Nestor. The wise horseman of Pylos, Nestor, pressed his aged hands to his knees, listening silently. Between broken prides and shaken ranks, the two men discussed how to appease the wrath of kings. Messengers they had sent carried hopeful words to Agamemnon's tent, words trying to capture pride in a net, attempting to avert disaster. Yet even Diomedes had to take greater risks in Achilles' absence. The Greeks, once advancing like waves, now retreated in fear, defending their lines. Shields were lined side by side, eyes fixed on the horizon. None could see the gleam of Achilles' bronze helmet. Battles continued in the field, but the sounds no longer carried glory or triumph. They sang instead of despair and exhaustion. A heavy silence hung in Achilles' tent. The scent of the sea still lingered in the air, along with memories of his mother, Thetis. The absence of Briseis wounded him like an added slash atop the blow to his pride. The flickering firelight gleamed at the tip of his spear, but not in his eyes. The shadow of fate moved quietly around him, weighing upon Achilles' heart. He did not move. His silence echoed louder than the noise of the army. Then Thetis rose from the depths of the salty waves. Her silver feet moved the sea barely, and as she reached the slopes of Olympus, words woven with her son's pain fell from her lips. Kneeling before Zeus's throne, she pleaded, "Let the Achaeans pay the price of their pride. Let Troy's fortune rise." Zeus, with a heavy and inevitable nod, shifted the balance. As days passed in succession, the plains of Troy resounded with the song of spears and the cries of swords. Yet Achilles' absence was no longer merely a gap. It became a growing chasm. Hector, the bravest son of Priam, the shield of the Trojans, saw this opportunity. His bronze helmet gleamed in the sun like a sign. Each glint bolstered the courage of the Trojan ranks. Mothers praying atop the walls of the city, seeing Hector's horse in the dusty plain, breathed deep in gratitude. Hector fought not only for his own honor. In every assault were the warmth of Andromache's arms, the laughter of his little son Astyanax, and the trembling hopes of old King Priam. To the Trojans, he was more than a warrior. Though the city walls fell, his chest would still stand as a rampart before them. Agamemnon and Menelaus saw that fortune had withdrawn from them. They shouted orders, offered sacrifices, but the gods had turned their faces away. The two Ajaxes, Aias Telamonios and Aias Aulis, fought with iron fury, lowering their spears upon the enemy, arms aching, throats burning from shouts. Yet still, they could not fill the void left by Achilles, and so the Trojans pressed forward more boldly with each passing day. War chariots carved deep furrows in the ground, advancing toward the Achaeans' ships. Salt-worn, pitch-strengthened wooden hulls rocked lightly in the sea breeze. They were the Greeks' sole hope for return, their last refuge. If a spark touched the sails of these ships, the entire hope of homecoming would rise in smoke, dissipating into the sky. The fate of heroes, kings, and gods now balanced on a thin plank, a scorched pride, and the salty breath of the sea. Beyond the horizon, the true storm of war grew slowly. Achilles' tent lay shrouded in silence. From outside, the cries of battle, the pounding of horse hooves, the clash of metal seeped into the tent like a whisper. Patroclus knelt before Achilles, his eyes lingering on the glint of armor. In a slow and trembling voice he spoke, "If you will not fight, at least give me your armor. The Myrmidons await you. The Trojans will think you have returned. They will retreat, and the Greeks will breathe." Achilles silently nodded, carrying pride and anger in his gaze for a moment as he extended the armor. "Protect the ships," he said, "but do not chase fame to the walls of Troy." Patroclus placed the helmet on his head and donned the armor. Every movement was a rhythm, every step a summons. The Myrmidons followed him in waves. Each strike of a sword, each clash of shields, gave the Trojans the illusion that the legendary Achilles had returned. Light arrows flew in the first encounters, swords struck, armor sparked. Patroclus's eyes measured the shock and fear of the Trojans, meeting every blow with calculated speed. The Myrmidons formed a protective circle around him. With every step, the enemy drew back a little more. Yet the intoxication of victory filled Patroclus's youthful heart. He forgot Achilles' warning, his gaze locked on the shine of Troy's walls. With the Myrmidons, he pressed forward, driving the Trojans back, reaching to the very base of the walls. And then came the moment to face Hector. Hector's shield gleamed in the sun, his spear poised in deadly silence. The two heroes stood amidst dust and smoke. The wind tossed their hair, and the battlefield was alive with the clash of metal and the fury of horses. The first strike came from Hector. His spear struck Patroclus's armor, echoing with a metallic ring. Patroclus staggered but quickly retaliated. His sword clashed against Hector's shield, sparks flying into the air. Every blow was a collision of fate, every step a moment in a story being written. Patroclus drove forward against the retreating Trojan soldiers. With each strike, a whisper, a cry arose. Achilles has returned. The Myrmidons, drawing strength from this illusion, surged across the field like a wave. But fate approached quietly. A spear thrown slyly by Euphorbus struck Patroclus in the shoulder. Pain, carried by the wind, tossed his hair. Patroclus faltered, yet his eyes remained forward. Finally, Hector gathered all his strength and thrust his spear into Patroclus's chest. As Patroclus fell, a brief silence enveloped the field. The Myrmidon's cries mixed with the roar of battle. His final words, spoken to Hector, resonated. "It was not you who killed me, but fate and the gods. Yet even at death's threshold, Achilles will find you." Hector felt the weight of victory. Patroclus's words buried his pride in silence. The death of a friend was not just a fall, it was the herald of Achilles' unending rage, of the great disaster approaching Troy. The battlefield, filled with the scent of blood and metal, darkened as Patroclus's body became a symbol in the eyes of the Myrmidons and the Greeks. Every wave, every wind whispered his courage and tragedy. Patroclus's death exploded in Achilles' camp like a storm, as if the sky shed its own tears, colliding with wind and sea and grief. When the news arrived, Achilles' cry echoed across the plains of Troy. The clash of metal, the pounding of hooves, the moan of the wind, all fell silent at once. The sound reached not only mortals, but even to the heights of Olympus. The gods stood still, feeling the weight of death and wrath. Achilles' heart burned like a coal. The drops from his eyes were not just salty tears, but sparks of fire, symbols of consuming rage. Every breath bore the weight of his friend's blood and loss. When Thetis heard her son's cry, she trembled. The pain hidden deep within her heart was revealed as never before. Patroclus's motionless body had become the embodiment of Achilles' pride, loneliness, and deep mourning. Thetis turned to Olympus's masterful smith Hephaestus to ease her son's pain and kindle the fire of vengeance. The god of fire and metal brought life through her hands. Hephaestus's hammers struck in heavy rhythmic melody. Each blow etched the secrets of the universe onto the armor's surface. The sky, cities, dancing maidens, warring armies. Hephaestus's craftsmanship transformed the armor into a mirror of the cosmos, not just a tool of war. Every detail whispered that the warrior bore not only death but all the beauty of life. Achilles, still burning in his gaze, gathered the Myrmidons in the camp's silence. When he reached for the armor, the metal's shine fused with his fury. Each blow, each breath, each step shone like a storm. The armor protected not only Achilles' body, but his soul, materializing his wrath. As the Myrmidons lined up behind Achilles, every glance and step toward his enemies sent a message of threat. The Trojans drew back behind their walls. The battlefield fell silent, but this silence heralded the coming storm. Achilles' footfalls, each strike against the earth, announced the terror to come. But his rage affected more than men. Even the river god Scamander swelled against his advance. Waters foamed and cries rose with the spear's arrival. Yet not even the river god's might could fully withstand Achilles' fury. Every spear strike, every shield clash, each step illuminated the battlefield like a star blazing with anger. When Achilles stepped onto the field, he sought neither victory nor fame nor praise. All he desired was the fire of vengeance to cleanse Patroclus's blood. Every fallen Trojan, every retreating soldier trembled in the shadow of his wrath. The Myrmidons surged like an unshakable wave through their leader's might. The clash of swords and spears deepened with every breath. Wind tossed his hair, dust clouds blinded eyes. The battlefield reeked of blood and metal. Yet Achilles moved like a supernatural being. Each movement told a story, every gaze echoed like prophecy. The Trojans retreated before him, hiding behind their walls, trembling from a mixture of fear and awe. Patroclus's blood had not yet dried in the dust of the battlefield, but Achilles' heart was ready to erupt like a volcano. Every step shook the ground. Every breath created tension in the air like electricity. The Myrmidons felt the silent, intense fury of their leader, following each of his movements. The metallic chime of swords, the gleam of armor, and the pounding of hooves formed a symphony, but one of death and wrath. Achilles' armor was more than a tool of war. On his chest was the fate of Trojans and Greeks. On his shoulders, the sky and waves. On his arms, cities dancing. Every gleam was a threat to enemies, a beacon of hope for allies. When sunlight struck the polished metal, it reflected across the battlefield like a living legend. The Myrmidons moved like a leading wave, each warrior synchronized with Achilles' steps, mirroring his fury, each strike. The Trojans trembled in the front lines as if this superhuman rage burned them directly. Each clash of shields, every spear strike was perceived like a slowed motion film. The sharp metallic tones and the stones striking horses' hooves merged, and there, Hector's shadow rose beyond the battlefield. The brave son of Priam, Troy's shield, carried the pride of thick walls and its people. His steps filled his enemies with courage and fear. Every glance reflected resolve and strategy. When Achilles sensed his presence, the world seemed to pause. The wind stilled, birds fell silent. Only the breaths of two heroes could be heard. The first gaze between Achilles and Hector struck the battlefield like lightning. In both their eyes were fury, pride, and the weight of fate. As the Myrmidons watched their leader stand like a giant behind them, the Trojans drew strength from Hector's steadfast stance. The breath of two armies merged beneath the shadow of these warriors. The pain of Patroclus' death was felt in every move of Achilles. As he drew his sword, the metal sliced through the air, the glint transforming into a war song. Each step struck fear into Trojan hearts. Each thrust of a spear told a story. This is no mere battle, but a legend of vengeance. Hector saw Achilles advance and raised his shield. The space between the two warriors seemed as short as a breath, as long as a lifetime. Every strike, every move was a torrent of emotion. Shock, courage, fear, and anger intermingled. Achilles' sword swung like lightning, Hector's spear racing as if against the wind. In their clash, time froze. Sky and earth trembled at the wrath of these warriors. Every movement, the falling dirt, the flung shields and clashing metal formed a rhythm. Each attack by Achilles carried a message not only to Hector, but to all of Troy. The voice of this vengeance cannot be stopped by walls or armies. And in that moment, Hector realized he faced not a man but a storm of wrath. Achilles' gaze, the shadow of the Myrmidons, the gleam of his armor, and the world slowing with every step. All of it was a symphony testing Hector's courage. And finally, Achilles and Hector faced each other. In front of the walls of Troy, the two warriors, each carrying the weight of their own world, stood. Hector drew his sword, yet a gnawing doubt lingered within him. The man before him seemed more a god than a mortal. At first Hector fled, and Achilles pursued him 3 times around the walls. The curious eyes of the city watched them. With each turn, Hector's fate drew nearer, while the fire of Achilles' wrath blazed ever higher. At last, Hector accepted his fate, stopped, and raised his spear. The warriors locked eyes. The clatter of swords, the clash of shields, and the howl of the wind rose into the melody of battle. Athena guided Achilles while Apollo sought to protect Hector. As eyes lifted to the sky, the breaths of the gods were silent witnesses. Each step, every drop of sweat, every exhale reflected the intensity of battle and the inevitability of death. Achilles' spear found a weak point in Hector's armor, an opening just beside the throat, and passed through with a deep cry. In his final breath, Hector thought of his city and his beloved wife Andromache. His heart beat once more with anger, fear, and love. The silence echoing from Troy's walls mingled with Achilles' footsteps upon the body, the trembling of shields and the thundering hooves. Achilles tied Hector's lifeless body to his chariot and dragged it through the city. With each step the ground trembled. Earth, stone, and stone walls silently witnessed this horror. The people of Troy froze before their homes, their silent cries scattered by the wind. In the Achaean camp, wonder and fear mingled. They had to confront the wrath of their hero. Sunlight struck Achilles' new armor, the gleaming metal burning like a dazzling flame. The howl of the wind, the tremor of shields, and the pounding of hooves transformed the battlefield into a symphony. Every sound, every tone, echoed wrath, grief, and fate. The fury within Achilles spread like a storm ignited by Patroclus' death. This storm knew neither city nor human heart, carrying only the cold weight of justice and vengeance. On the edges of the battlefield, among fallen shields and broken spears, small details went unnoticed. A young soldier thought of his mother. An old man recalled his coffee and morning prayers. Every breath, every silence was part of this symphony of death. Troy watched the courage and fear of its heroes, while the Achaeans tested the limits of wrath and fate. Achilles' gaze was fixed on Hector's body and the silent crowd around him. There was no sweetness in this victory, only Patroclus' blood and the vengeance of friendship remained. With every step, he shook the earth. With every breath, he summoned the storm. The walls of Troy were no longer merely stone, they became symbols of wrath and grief. Achilles' presence was a warning. No power could withstand fate and fury. That night, the aged King Priam silently approached the Achaean camp, his heart heavy with fear and helplessness. Every step carried the weight of his son's death. As the wind blew lightly, it seemed even the walls of Troy felt his sorrow. Beneath the moonlight, the tents stretched like trembling shadows, and the breaths of soldiers standing guard within echoed a melody of grief. When Priam reached Achilles' tent, his knees buckled. With trembling hands, he pushed the door and entered quietly. Achilles, peering from the shadow of his helmet, held only rage and mourning in his eyes. Yet the pain he saw in Priam's hands suddenly reflected the resonance of humanity. The old king knelt, begging for the return of Hector's body. His hands trembled over the very hands that had slain his son. His eyes held both fear and hope. This silent plea slowly melted the anger inside the tent. Tears streamed from Achilles' eyes, yet they were not merely tears. They were droplets of pain mixed with the fire of Patroclus' loss. The trembling hope in Priam's hands reminded Achilles of his own father. For a moment, vengeance and wrath were overshadowed, and humanity shone through. Achilles made a quiet decision. Hector's body was delivered to Priam for an honorable funeral. As Priam carried his son's lifeless body into Troy, a mournful murmur rose behind the city walls. Women tore at their hair, letting tears flow, while men bowed their heads and prayed silently. As the people of Troy bid Hector farewell on his final journey, they held torches, and their lips recited ancient hymns. It was a vow echoing in the heart of the city. The walls whispered Hector's name, and even the gods would remember this profound grief. Smoke from the funeral pyres rose with the wind toward the Achaean ships. From afar, Achilles watched the scene, a strange pang in his chest. For a brief moment, anger and grief mingled with mercy. Yet the wheel of war did not pause for fragile moments of compassion. Days passed, and Trojans and Achaeans faced each other again. Apollo still stood with the Trojans. Athena and Hera were behind the Greeks. Zeus readjusted the scales of fate. The strings tightened, and the calm before the storm fell. Achilles bore Patroclus's mourning, and by returning Hector's body, had shown a brief glimmer of humanity, yet the gods had prepared a new stage for him. On the battlefield, every breath, every spear strike carried the weight of the past and the terror of the future. The earth, soaked with blood and tears, resonated with the cold sound of metal in the silent night. As Achilles watched Hector's funeral smoke, he felt the ache of Patroclus's loss once more in his heart. His fury spread like a storm even the gods feared. With every step, with every gaze, he carried the weight of both loss and mercy. And this weight foreshadowed the new stages that would open before him. After Hector's death, Paris carried the anger that had built up in his heart. This fury grew like an avalanche. He was not yet as skilled a warrior as Hector. After all, he had not been born with a sword and spear in hand. Yet hatred and ambition drove him toward a tragic task. Under the daylight, Paris drew his bow like a coiled serpent, channeling the pain and anger within him into each breath and each pull of the string. In his ears echoed the whisper of Apollo. He has but one weakness, the heel his mother could not protect. These words gave Paris both fear and resolve. The arrow, seemingly guided by a divine force beyond his own will, flew from his hand. A hush had fallen among the archers of the Trojan army. Every eye followed Paris's movements, every breath held. When the arrow left the bow, it whistled through the air. The howl of the wind spread like the silent melody of death. Time seemed to slow. For a moment, both Trojans and Greeks watched the thin line between arrow and fate. As the arrow glimmered in beams of light, astonishment and fleeting awareness appeared in Achilles' eyes, as if in that instant he understood the jealous games of the gods and the delicate weave of destiny. Then the heel struck the ground. Achilles' body fell like a heavy shadow. Blood spread across the earth, a symbol of both death and heroism. That heel represented both Achilles' greatest strength and his deepest vulnerability. The wind carried the scent of blood across the field. The roar of battle paused, like the silence of nature itself. The Myrmidons, witnessing their leader's fall, froze in sudden horror. Their eyes held both shock and grief. Even the gods fell silent. Thetis, like a shattered mother, watched her son's pain with tears from the sky. All worries, all prophecies had turned into reality, revealing Achilles' mortal vulnerability. The battlefield bore witness to a hero's fall, an instant both tragic and the pinnacle of legend. As the arrow pierced the heel, Achilles' eyes reflected a mixture of rage, pain, and astonishment. The earth mingled with the hero's blood. The sound of war fell silent for a moment, leaving only the murmur of death and fate. This scene revealed both Achilles' humanity and the fragility of his divine heritage. With the child's, Achilles, arrival into the world, a gentle breeze blew along the slopes of Mount Pelion on the coast of Thessaly. The wind lightly stirred the leaves, waves lapped softly at the shore, and the sky glittered with stars. Forests, mountains, and flowing rivers seemed to whisper, celebrating the birth of a new hero. Even the baby's first cry matched the rhythm of the waves, as if nature itself acknowledged his presence. The sea goddess Thetis fixed her eyes on her tiny son. Looking at him, she thought survival as a mortal would be impossible. For a sea goddess, mortality, a brief, fleeting breath, was as fragile and painful as the gentlest wind. Thetis wanted every drop of blood and every breath to belong to eternity. In that moment, the river Styx echoed in her mind. Born from the dark waters of the underworld, Styx was a river even the gods swore by. Legend said nothing that touched its waters could remain mortal, neither fire could burn nor sword could cut. Even mighty Zeus had sworn by it, and breaking that oath would upset the order of the gods. Thetis thought that if she dipped her son in these waters, he would become immortal. A mother's love and sincere desire would draw the river's divine power. In the trembling moonlight, Thetis gently held her tiny son swaddled in a blanket. By the river, the wind barely stirred. Only the deep murmur of Styx broke the night. It seemed all the spirits of the underworld had gathered to witness this strange ritual. Carefully holding Achilles upside down, Thetis dipped him into the icy waters. The shiver of his small body and the child's cry pierced the night, yet Thetis remained determined. In this water she intended to leave behind all future pains, mortal fears and vulnerabilities of her son. As the river's water swirled, a distant murmur seemed to whisper, "A goddess's love cannot change the threads of fate." After lifting her child from the water, Thetis gently wrapped him. The little body still shivered, yet a light of power gleamed in his eyes, a fusion of mortal fragility and divine potential. As Styx's cold waters slowly flowed away in the silent night, Thetis's heart swelled with both peace and sorrow. With each breath, the river seemed to hum a lullaby touching the child's spirit. The wind stirred again, the trees rustled softly, and waves lapped gently on the shore. As she cradled her son, Thetis silently vowed, "I will always protect you. I will always be by your side. Whatever the future holds, I will be with you, with the light of this world and the depth of the sea." That night, the waters of Styx, the soft moonlight and the gentle wind bore witness to the birth of a tiny hero. Every breath, every wave, every rustle of leaves carried a tranquil melody, slowly enveloping the night, as if the world itself was preparing for Achilles' future legend. Thetis gently dipped her tiny son into the icy waters of the Styx, passing every part of him through the river, except his heel. That small heel had never touched the waters, as if the delicate game of fate had preserved both immortality and vulnerability together. When the child emerged, he was almost an immortal being. His skin could resist swords, his body could not be burned by fire, his spirit was unbreakable, yet that small heel remained defenseless, a subtle mark of destiny. Hidden in the soft murmur of the wind, it was like a silent secret. Whether Thetis realized it at that moment, no one knows. Some say a brief shadow passed over her face, or that Styx's deep murmur whispered to her. Others claim she was unaware, caught in the gods' playful weave of fate. Whatever the truth, the balance of the gods was preserved. Every great power must carry a small fragility, otherwise the order of the world could falter. Years passed, and the mysterious heel remained like a whisper carried by the wind. Thetis entrusted her son to the centaur Chiron to raise him. In the quiet corner of his cave on Mount Pelion, Chiron taught Achilles both the art of war and the wisdom of life. Each morning, as the sun slowly rose behind the mountain, Achilles' body and soul grew in harmony with Chiron's lessons. His sword moved as if dancing in the air, his spear slicing the wind. Chiron taught him not only the techniques of war, but also the tales of heroism, the depths of the human spirit, the subtleties of courage and compassion. With every breath, harmony with nature; with every motion, discipline and grace combined. Yet even Chiron did not know of the hidden heel. Only in Thetis's heart a dark premonition lingered. One day that small heel would be remembered in blood. In the faint light of the moon casting shadows on the cave walls, the soft murmur of the wind and the silence of the mountain seemed to carry whispers of the future. Each night, like a gentle melody, the rustling of wind and Styx's distant murmur told the story of the tiny hero's fate. As Thetis caressed her son, the wind seemed to sing him a lullaby. Strength and fragility walked together. Every breath, every step must be taken with care. And thus the small heel remained a silent secret whispered by the wind. Every move, every battle, every act of heroism would be shaped in the shadow of this vulnerable point. The silence of the mountain and the deep murmur of the river enveloped the night, quietly blessing the tiny hero's journey. As time passed, Achilles became the brightest star in the Greek world. Heroic tales of his speed, courage, and grace never left the tongues of men. Rivers, mountains, and the wind seemed to salute him. Everyone who saw him recognized the divine blood he carried. Yet the games of the gods never ended. One day Paris's bow would find its mark, guided by Apollo's whispers, and strike the one place Styx's waters had not touched. The narrator pauses softly, lowering their voice, whispering to the listener. A mother's love cannot always break the finest threads of fate. The child dipped in Styx stands at the very heart of a great epic. Every spear thrust, every clash of swords, every act of heroism will echo with his name. Yet even the greatest power walks in the shadow of the smallest fragility. Years later, when the Greek army gathered at Aulis, even the name Achilles sent fear into the hearts of his enemies. His near immortality became legend. His steps seemed to merge with the wind. Every breath, every glance reminded both comrades and foes alike. Yet the laughter of the gods, the distant murmur of Styx and Thetis, trembling hands still whispered the story of that small heel. Every strength walks with a fragility. And finally, when Paris drew his bow, the riverbank shrouded in night revealed the true weight of fate. The arrow floated silently through the air and struck the heel Styx had never touched. Achilles fell. The sky, the sea, and the wind seemed to fall into silence. His fall was not merely the death of a hero, it was a storm that shook the spirit, courage, and confidence of the Achaean army. Achilles' armor had now become the most prized of spoils. The shining metal was not only a symbol of power and glory, it reflected his legacy, his legend, and the life he had lived. Every hero wanted to see who would claim this armor, for the one who wore it would be recognized as the greatest champion of the Greek army. In the silence of the night, the wind gently swayed the branches of trees. Distant mountains echoed slowly, like the murmur of Styx. The water along the riverbank reflected the moonlight like a silver veil, and the scent of the earth carried the memory of battle, whispering a calm lullaby to any listener. Each breath, each soft gust of wind reminded them of a hero who had once approached immortality. Achilles' fall and the legacy of his armor moved slowly in the listener's mind, like waves gently brushing the shore. Every whisper, every pause recalled both the greatness of the legend and the fragility of the human spirit. After Achilles' death, Ajax believed deeply that he alone deserved the legendary armor his friend had borne. Following Achilles, he was the mightiest warrior of the Greek army. Each step, each breath reflected both his strength and his pride. In the quiet of the camp, the night wind lightly rustled the tents. Trees made gentle whispering sounds, and distant night noises carried softly through the fields, enveloping the listener. Yet Odysseus, with his cunning, intelligence, and mastery of words, persuaded the kings. The armor passed into his hands. Ajax felt wronged. Storms roared within his heart, his skin prickling with tension. The silence cutting through the dark night stretched like a shadow, reflecting the fury burning inside him. That night, in the shadow of madness, his eyes blinded by hatred, he grasped his sword. In his dream, he attacked Odysseus and the entire Achaean army, reclaiming his honor, tearing his enemies to pieces in his imagination. Moonlight seeped through the tents, gleaming off the metal of his sword. Shadows danced, and the night silence grew heavier with each breath. But when morning came, he opened his eyes to find only the flock of sheep he had slain with his own hands. Silence had enveloped the night. The stars trembled with a flickering light, as if aware of his sorrow. Each leaf, each branch whispered his tragedy with a faint rustle. Shame and regret gradually wrapped around Ajax's soul. There was neither anger nor fear in his eyes, only heavy disappointment and deep dishonor. He plunged his sword into the earth, as if attempting to reclaim his honor from the very depths. Then, in a slow, almost rhythmic motion, he surrendered himself to eternal silence. The night wind gently caressed his story, and the stars shone as if hiding tears. One by one, the heroes of the Achaean camp disappeared. The war devoured not only enemies, but its own champions. Every tent, every campfire trembled with a silent lament. The moonlight filtering from the sky gently illuminated the shadows of blood and pride. The soft rustling of the wind suppressed the screams of battle. The trees, shedding leaves quietly, created a hymn-like tone. This tragedy showed how war consumed not only bodies, but also spirits. The inner worlds of the heroes gradually fragmented. Eyes, hands, and hearts bore the weight of both physical and spiritual exhaustion. The trembling line of honor slowly fractured the kings who had once stood together, unraveling from within. Every breath, every moment of silence offered the listener both profound sorrow and rhythmic peace. As the night wore on, the soft melody of the wind passing through the tents softened the gravity of the events. Combined with the flickering light of the stars, it created a sense of calm and tranquility. Each word, each silent whisper, gradually prepared the listener for a deep sleep. Ajax's tragedy became not just the fall of a hero, but the silent, rhythmic echo of war infiltrating the souls of all. The silent night of the 10th year had settled over Troy. The air carried the heavy, sharp scent of burnt wood and blood, and every breath seemed to echo the weariness of war. The towers still stood tall, their shadows stretching long and silent beneath the moonlight. Neither Hector's courage nor Achilles' fury had ended the 10-year siege. Neither swords nor spears nor the dance of flames had broken the walls. The war continued in a weary, cautious silence. As Odysseus slowly lifted his gaze to the stars, a thought stirred within him, quiet and delicate like the whisper of a breeze, to turn the Trojans' faith, their hopes, and their pride into a weapon. This was not merely a tactic of war, it was the spark of a plan that would slip into Troy's very soul, touch their hearts and test their sacred beliefs. The horse was not merely an animal to Troy, it was a symbol revered as a divine gift from Apollo, Poseidon, and Athena. At temple doors, at household entrances, among statues that adorned the city, this noble creature was believed to bring prosperity and fortune. Odysseus used this knowledge skillfully, turning the Trojans' pride, their faith, and their weaknesses to his advantage. Near the shore, Greek craftsmen quietly and carefully gathered the salvaged pieces. Broken ship masts, sunken oars, splintered timbers from shattered boats. All came together to form the body of a colossal horse. As the wood interlocked, it was as if the muscles of a giant skeleton were stretching. Cracks, creaks, and the groaning of timber echoed softly through the night. From the outside, Every curve and edge looked flawless, as though shaped by a god. Inside, it was arranged like a labyrinth for the hidden warriors, silent and deep like the dark spine of a breathing giant. Odysseus chose the bravest and most patient warriors, Menelaus, the king burning to reclaim his honor; Diomedes, a young and fiery hero; Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, a passionate youth longing to avenge his father, and many more. Each carried in their hearts the long-delayed dream of victory. They marched forward thinking not of death, but of the shame of failing to win. To return home without conquering Troy would have choked them with dishonor. The night's gentle breeze circled the horse, softly brushing its wooden sides like a slow lullaby. The sea lapped quietly at the shore, the rhythm of the waves weaving a soft symphony around the horse. In the distance, smoke from burning camps drifted lazily skyward. Flames glimmering like stars adorned the night. The hush and faint murmurs reminded them of the plan's perfection and the silence it required. The great body of the horse seemed almost to breathe, filled with a hidden dark power. Each plank of wood, each joint reflected the quiet, patient waiting of the scheme. Inside, the soldiers held their breath in deep silence, their hearts beating in a rhythm that seemed to touch one another. One step, one breath, one glance, all blended in perfect harmony with the night, merging with the rhythm of wind, waves, and stars. Odysseus' plan was supported not only by cunning but by the stillness of the night. Within that stillness lay something the Trojans did not yet know but would soon sense. Perhaps fear in their hearts, but certainly curiosity and wonder. On this night, beneath the silent shadow of the colossal wooden horse, history would be written. After 10 long years of siege, the Greek army staged a feigned retreat. The ship slipped slowly away from the shore, gliding silently beneath the gentle waves as if abandoning the siege. Moonlight traced fine silver lines across the water, illuminating the silence and empty beach the army had left behind. On the sand remained only the enormous wooden horse and a captive bound in chains, Sinon. He appeared worn and exhausted, yet the light in his eyes held both credibility and quiet resolve. The people of Troy watched him from the walls. Sinon's voice trembled slightly, but his words were carefully chosen, flowing like a softly whispered tale. They tried to sacrifice me. I escaped. This horse is a gift to Athena. If you bring it within your walls, the goddess's favor will be with you. But if you destroy it, a curse will fall upon you. 10 years of war's fatigue, hunger, and despair reached the Trojans' ears like a melody. Each word slowly sowed seeds of hope in their hearts. Though doubt lingered in their minds, their bodies, burdened with exhaustion, yielded. Years of helplessness made the lie seem like truth. Only one remained wary, the priest and seer Laocoon. Long years of observation and war's bitter lessons whispered to him. "Beware of gifts from the enemy," he cried. Without a tremor, he cast his spear and struck the horse's flank. The wood echoed with a hollow, deep sound. The crowd paused and held their breath. In that moment, 2 enormous serpents rose from the depths of the sea. Coiling giants wrapped around Laocoon and his 2 sons. Their screams echoed across the stone square. The silent night filled with the hiss of the snakes. This was Apollo's sign. The god willed the Trojans to be deceived. The people saw and believed. The horse was sacred and untouchable. Throughout the day, preparations began. A wave of joy swept through the city's streets. Women adorned their hair with flowers. Children clung to the horse's colossal legs, singing old lullabies and humming gentle tunes. Temple priests whispered prayers by candlelight, filling the night with soft hymns to Athena. Helen watched from the walls, her heart a tangle of joy, guilt, and a quiet unease. Her heart trembled lightly, like leaves brushed by the wind. Paris moved among the jubilant crowd, proudly passing by the horse, unaware of the disaster awaiting him. The fate Aphrodite had whispered already began to enfold him in silence. As night slowly descended upon the city, the sea caressed the shore, the waves' rhythm dancing in harmony with the massive body of the horse. Hidden within, the Greek warriors drew deep breaths, listening quietly to one another and waiting for the moment. Their hearts beat in shared rhythm, one breath, one step, listening softly to the night. Every stone, every shadow, every rustling breeze seemed to recall the silent harmony of the plan. Within the horse's wooden gaps, the soldiers waited with patient stillness. Each inhaled with inward calm and focus, blending with the shadows. Outside, the wind, the gentle sway of trees, and the sea's soft whisper had become the music of the night. This quiet, serene, almost hypnotic harmony stirred curiosity and a faint unease in the hearts of the Trojans, spreading through the night like a whispering lullaby. As the darkness deepened, the horse's silent shadow stretched slowly toward the walls. Each step, each breath, each subtle movement touched the watchers' hearts, carrying tension and silence like a gentle, sleep-bound melody. Troy's fate, in this quiet vigil, was slowly taking shape. It was midnight. The city slept behind the walls of Troy, when Odysseus whispered to his soldiers, "The time has come." Even the whispering wind trembled, gently rustling the leaves of the trees, deepening the night. The Greek soldiers hiding inside the wooden horse slid toward the shadows, one by one. A small panel slowly opened, letting the cold night air seep in. Each breath could be heard, a slight shiver in the stillness. Silent footsteps spread across the dark streets. Doors were quietly broken. Guards fell soundlessly. The night's silence embraced every step, like a soft, rhythmic lullaby, slowly wrapping the stones, walls, and shadows. Every corner, every stone, bore witness to the quiet waiting of a hidden plan. From the windows of houses, the first lights began to seep out, the yellow and orange glow of fire. Smoke rose, filling the night, yet silence still held everything. Panicked screams mixed with the sharp clang of metal. But the sounds spread so slowly, each echo seemed almost soothing, a gentle rhythm in the ears. The streets filled with fire and ash, yet shadows drifted softly, like a quiet melody. When they reached Priam's palace, Neoptolemus mercilessly threw the old king to the ground. Each fall told like a rhythm, slow and deliberate. Even the fury of battle had become a kind of silent lullaby. The spirit, the heart, the last hope of Troy trembled gently, like a quiet dirge filling the night. Paris was momentarily defended by Aphrodite, but arrows descended from the sky and found him. Each arrow, carried softly by the wind, reached its target, slow but certain. Helen met Menelaus's gaze in the dim room of the palace. Their eyes touched, yet Aphrodite's shadow lay between them. Menelaus lowered his sword. Between anger and the absence of anger, he accepted the quiet flow of fate. He guided Helen toward the ships. There was neither full love nor full hatred, only the silent rhythm of night and war. The city slowly wrapped itself in fire, screams, and quiet grief. The dance of smoke and flame rose toward the sky, like a lullaby. The hiss of the wind transformed into a soft melody, flowing between the stones. That night was Troy's final night. Mother's love, hero's pride, king's honor, and the silent cunning of a horse all came together. The city slowly rested. The fury of war gave way to silence. Troy's stones still whispered. The sky, Wind and waves quietly reminded the world of past suffering, like a soft lullaby. This final act softly told the story of 10 years of war and the closing of a legend. Danaus was one of Troy's bravest sons, Aphrodite's favored child, a prince of noble blood through his father Anchises, cousin of Hector, courageous defender of Troy. In the 10th year of war, the city was already burning. Stones fell. Destruction murmured in every corner. Smoke rose from rooftops. Temple columns had collapsed. Sacred statues were broken. Women were chained. Children cried, running through the streets. Corpses lay piled together. Every step carried the silent shadow of death. Amid the chaos, Aeneas was tired but resolute. He lifted his old and struggling father Anchises onto his shoulders, each step careful, each breath careful. He held the small hand of his son, Ascanius, tightly. The child's fearful, astonished eyes fixed on the burning streets. Every corridor, every stone reminded them of past heroism and Troy's legacy. Aphrodite's silent whispers seemed to guide her son's destiny. The legendary future of Rome was slowly taking shape through Aeneas's escape. Passing through the burning streets, Aeneas felt the courageous spirit of his cousin Hector, once the city's protector. He knew that Hector's loss was a tragedy for Troy. Yet Aeneas's determination carried a new light of hope. Amid destruction, carrying both past and future, he moved life and destiny forward. Protecting his father and son, he slipped past enemy soldiers patrolling dark corners. The glow of burning flames hit his eyes. Every corner, every shadow, held a threat of death. Yet Aeneas advanced calmly. At the city's outskirts, smoke rose to the sky. Distant cries of battle showed Troy's final moments. Feeling his father's weary breaths and Ascanius's trembling hands, Aeneas took careful steps. Aphrodite's whispers echoed in his ears. Threads were being woven, threads that would one day lead to Rome's legendary destiny. Slowly, the walls of Troy faded behind them. The city was now only memory, a shadow of ashes. Women and children were chained, temples destroyed, sacred statues broken. Yet amidst the ruin, Aeneas embraced the past's legacy and the hope of the future. Every step carried both the weight of loss and the sprouting of a new world. Before the sun had fully risen, Troy's ruined streets trembled in silence. Flames from the night still glowed, stones shone with warm light. Broken columns, fallen temples, and the musty scent of burned homes carried traces of a nightmare that time tried to erase. In the city square, the massive horse still stood, once believed a gift from the gods, but actually a deception, a reminder of cunning power. Odysseus had delivered the final blow to Troy, but his journey was only beginning. In minds echoed not only the heroes' victories, but the losses they had faced, the pains to remember. Agamemnon, returning to Mycenae with victory, would face betrayal and Clytemnestra's wrath. Diomedes and Menelaus would go on distant campaigns, yet the honor they lost would never fully return. Each hero's fate had been shaped under the shadow of the Trojan horse. Apparent victory hid the gods' wrath and fate's cruel games. As wind softly blew among the stone piles, the scent of burned wood thickened. A child sitting on a broken marble slowly stood. Elderly women cried, pulled their hair, whispered prayers silently to the gods. Smoke still rose from a few burning houses, drifting, coloring the sky in gray and orange. Odysseus's gaze lingered on the horizon, carrying both victory's weight and harsh truths. Most heroes had already returned, tired and silent. Troy's silence echoed not only victory, but losses and sorrow. As sunlight gradually touched the stones, Every broken column, cracked stone gently reminded them of the tragedy that had unfolded. The horse still stood in the square, glimmering in sunlight, its shadows trembling slightly. Within this silence, the voices of past heroes softly echoed. Victory and tragedy together, a quiet melody seeping into stones, sky, and hearts. That night, Troy's fate was quietly written. How a city's honor could be laid low by cunning and intelligence. How sacred values could be manipulated. How human destiny could be shaped under the god's silent gaze. All of it seen in rawest form. The stone walls of the city now whispered a silent yet profound story. The toppled columns of temples, the charred remains of burned homes, and the ashes drifting across empty squares in the wind all echoed the cries of the past. Women wept quietly for their lost husbands and sons, while children trembled among the stones, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. The elderly wandered through the once glorious streets of the city, raising their hands to the sky and pleading with the gods for mercy. Troy was no longer merely a city. It had become the silent witness of a disaster, a cunning ruse, and the courage of a people. Years passed, generations changed, yet the shadows of those stone walls still rise over Hisarlik Hill. Within the modern boundaries of Çanakkale, these lands have stood for thousands of years through the tides of history. Every year, thousands of visitors from all over the world come here to walk among the ruins of the ancient city. As they step between the stones, it is as if they can hear the whispers of the past with every footfall, the footsteps of warriors, the silent cries of women, the triumphant shouts of heroes, and the lingering shadow of betrayal. All of this still resonates upon the stones, the columns, and the broken temples. Troy is not only a city, it is a living history book. It stands as a monument that across centuries reveals both the darkest and the most heroic sides of human nature. Every stone, every broken column tells of the loves, the victories, the losses, and the betrayals once lived here. When the sun rises over Hisarlik Hill, the faint sounds carried by the wind seem to recall the heroes and victims of the past. The story of Troy is an unending echo, a lesson, a warning, and a legend. Troy, destroyed but never forgotten, continues to tell humanity of its faded heroics, its mistakes and its tragedies through the generations. Every visitor, upon touching the stones, feels the weight of thousands of years in a silent whisper. In this place, where war, love, betrayal, and heroism once intertwined, history still breathes. The end of Troy was not left hidden beneath stones and ashes. On the contrary, it became one of the greatest epic tales of Western civilization. For centuries, the story passed from the lips of poets and storytellers, transformed into legend, and was finally written down by the blind poet Homer. Homer's epic works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, present the Trojan War not merely as a series of events, but as an immortal work exploring the deepest conflicts of human nature: honor, vengeance, love, and fate. In every line, the superhuman powers of heroes, the interventions of gods, and the flow of miraculous events are described so vividly that the reader is drawn into the magic of mythology while also feeling the complexity of the human soul. Beyond Homer's epic tales, historians and archaeologists suggest that beneath these mythological narratives lies a semi-historical reality. For many years, Troy was considered only a legend. But in the 19th century, German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann changed everything. Using Homer's texts almost as a map, he excavated Hisarlik Hill in modern-day Çanakkale, Turkey, and uncovered multiple layers of ancient cities. These layers astonishingly matched the features described in the epics. Schliemann's discoveries proved that Troy was no longer just a legend, but a real city. Today, Troy is not a place existing only in legend. It stands as a city with tangible reality through archaeological findings. The excavated walls, towers, houses, and temple ruins show that this land has been inhabited since 3000 BCE and was for centuries a center of war and destruction. In particular, the layers known as Troy Sycings and Troy Sevener correspond to the period described in Homer's epics. Traces of fire and devastating earthquakes in these layers reveal the bloody and brutal reality of war. Every stone, every broken wall quietly whispers of the violence of battle, the pain of loss, and the courage of those who lived here. Modern visitors stepping into Troy's excavated grounds are greeted by a massive replica of a wooden horse. It is possible to climb inside and experience the narrow, dark space where the greatest heroes once hid. As visitors walk between the walls, they can imagine Hector riding his war chariot through these paths, or Achilles venting his fury while encamped nearby. With every step, the boundaries between history and legend blur. The stones become more than physical remnants. They become silent witnesses of the past. Troy bears not only the marks of a war, but the layered history of humanity over thousands of years. Every stone is a quiet witness to a love, a betrayal, or a heroic act. For this reason, every visit is more than a simple journey. It is a confrontation with the deepest emotions of human nature and the tragedies that have played out through history. To walk through Troy is to feel the heroics and betrayals immortalized in Homer's poetry, to experience the flow of history and the dual light and darkness of the human soul. Troy is not merely stone and earth. It is a story that defies time. Within it lie both the most heroic and the darkest aspects of humankind. Though the legends may seem like myths, the winds of Çanakkale still whisper the songs of ancient times. Sometimes, as you walk among the stones, it feels as if you can hear the brave step of a hero, the silent cry of a mother, the final breath of a city. Even after thousands of years, Troy still lives, still speaks, and still offers its story to humanity. Furthermore, the tomb of Achilles, Achilles' Tumulus, is located near Çanakkale in Çanakkale's Ezine district, on a mound known as Beşiktepe. In antiquity, this area was called Achillean, situated in the ancient region of Troas, close to Troy. According to legend, after Achilles was killed in the Trojan War, he was buried on this hill, and a great tumulus was raised over his grave. This mound symbolized his eternal rest and served as a landmark for ships passing by the coast. Historical sources tell us that when Alexander the Great embarked on his Asian campaign in 334 BCE, he visited Troy and came to the tomb of his legendary ancestor Achilles to offer sacrifices. This is not merely a legend, but strong evidence of a historical figure forging a connection with a mythological hero. Alexander's visit also reveals the significance of Achilles' tomb in the ancient world. Today, the area around Achilles' tumulus offers visitors a unique view with its historical and natural beauty. Though scientific excavations at the mound have uncovered remnants of ancient settlements, it is still regarded as the eternal resting place of the legendary hero. From its elevated position, one can see the entire plain and the Aegean Sea. This vantage point lays before you the very lands where the war took place and the walls of Troy once stood. Visiting Achilles' tomb reminds you once again of his pride, his fury, and his tragic end. He was not merely a warrior, but a hero who yielded to fate and sought immortality. The presence of his grave in Çanakkale proves that these lands are not only the site of a war, but also the heart of one of humanity's greatest epics. It is a tangible continuation of the story I have told you. If your path ever leads you to Troy, climb this hill. Feel the spirit of Achilles and listen to his story carried in the whispers of the sea and the wind. I hope this has been a beautiful story to end your day. I look forward to your comments and requests. Don't forget to follow my channel. Love.